Your Excellencies, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure and a privilege for me to welcome you on behalf of the Asser Institute and the John Adams Institute. Our colleague, Director Tracy Metz, will lead the conversation and guide you through the afternoon program, but we are here with a large group. I'm impressed by the attendance of this group, and I knew that there were actually more people interested in this conference than we had seats available, so we will have no problems with counting the exact number of participants. We thought that it is really appropriate for us, the John Adams Institute and the Asser Institute, to convene a conference, a small conference with excellent participants, speakers, starting with Ambassador Henne Schuwer and finishing with former NATO Secretary General Jaap Scheffer, who will arrive in somewhat later. He arrives from, as far as I know, from the United States or from Canada this morning, just this morning. The same is the case for Ambassador Schuwer, by the way. So we are here with a group that was just in time to discuss the consequences, the foreseeable consequences, as far as anything is foreseeable at present, of the Trump administration in international affairs. Here at the Asser Institute, we focus our research with my colleague Jan Nijman as the academic director. She will conclude the afternoon on trust and trustworthiness in international relations. And that is really appropriate for an institute that carries proudly the name of Tobias Asser, who in the late 19th century and in the early 20th century was among the proponents of enforcing trust through multilateralism, through treaties, through multilateral institutions. That's why we have the Peace Palace here, which resulted from the idea at the Hague Peace Conferences to have a permanent international court of arbitration and later on the Court of Justice, International Court of Justice. Now, that is exactly what is under pressure, what has become very much uncertain with the early days of the Trump administration. We have put our trust in international agreements, in international institutions, in multilateralism. His attitude towards these institutions and these treaties, be it with respect to climate problems or defense, NATO, or the European Union, appears not to be really favorable, to put it mildly. And we have to count with that. That doesn't mean that we celebrated everything that multilateral agreements have brought to us. There were doubts whether, for instance, the austerity programs favored by the International Monetary Fund were really beneficial to trust in international institutions in some of the countries affected by these austerity programs. But on the other hand, we have the World Bank, we have the institutions that have promoted international economic development also in the poor parts of the world. We have the treaties concerning human rights, which is the ultimate dimension of trust for human beings, that their human rights be respected. And we have the Convention for the against torture, which has to do also with a feature that is really worrying for many of us in the early announcements of the Trump administration. So there is enough stuff for debate, for considerations, for awareness. And therefore we are really happy and proud to have such an excellent group here together to investigate what we could do in a world that is called in the name of the program Trump's World, with respect to trust in international law and in international relations. Thank you for being here, and may I now introduce Tracy Metz, who will guide us through the program. Tracy, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hirschbalin, for this introduction. Welcome to you all. I will keep it, for now, very brief. My name is Tracy Metz. I'm the director of the John Adams Institute, and for now, still an American citizen. I'll leave it at that. I'll be conducting our discussion this afternoon. I'll also be giving a column just after the tea break, and I would now like to introduce the Dutch ambassador to the United States, Henne Schuwer.
Thank you, Ernst. Thank you, Tracy. Thank you all for coming to listen. Let me say from the outside, if you expect to hear from me the final word on what the Trump administration will be, I will disappoint you. I will give you 3 seconds now to leave the room. If not, I will try to tell you a little bit how we see it at the embassy in the Netherlands, what's going to happen. Let me introduce myself a little bit further. This is the 3rd time I serve in the United States. I came as ambassador to the United States in the summer of 2015, presented my credentials to President Obama. That was the 2nd time I was in Washington. I was in Washington at the late 90s, early 2000s, and I started my career in the United States in Los Angeles in the late 80s. So I have spent quite a substantial part of my career spent in the United States. I won't say that I'm an expert like Tracy, but I think I know the United States well. The other part of my career I spent mainly in Brussels with the European Union. I see some colleagues from that part as ambassador to the Kingdom of Belgium and as director of the private office of NATO, where I serve Jaap, the Scheffer, who will finish your conference. And I have always lived by what Jaap told me, that you can be a European and a transatlanticist. And I can tell you I'm a convinced transatlanticist. And like probably many of you, I grew up with that transatlantic notion. I grew up with the idea that the United States would be there for maybe forever, and that we had grown and we were what we were thanks to the United States in many ways. And that's not untrue. Many of you are, as me, of the generation of NATO. Started right after the Second World War, and I was again emboldened by the idea NATO and the United States by, for instance, the decision of the United States last year to pledge an extra $3.4 billion for the defense of Europe. It's amazing if we would realize that more than 70 years after the Second World War, a country like the United States pledges that amount of money for the defense of mainly the European continent. And that we have at Eygelshoven, now we'll get at Eygelshoven, a forward base where the United States will put material in case of, is amazing, 70 years after the Second World War. Like many of you, I grew up in a country which was rebuilt from the ravages of the Second World War by the support of the Marshall Aid. Tracy and her Adams Institute will organize a commemoration of that day, I think by heart is 7th of June, or 5th of June, then 2017. 70 years ago, the speech at the Harvard University of General Marshall, where the Marshall Aid was launched. Not only was it the Marshall Aid, it was also the idea that furthered European integration and the importance of that. I grew up with an admiration of the United States, its people, its involvement in the building of Europe. I also grew up, and many of you, in a world order that Europe and the United States made together. A world order after the Second World War that was based on our common values. Values that were, let's say, freedom, democracy, the rule of law. And I don't have to explain here in the Asser Institute and in the city of The Hague how important that rule of law was and the making of a international world order, a liberal order by which we did very, very well, a liberal order that was very attractive, not only to us, but to many other countries in the world who wanted to belong to that world order. Relations between the US and the Netherlands actually go back much further than what I just described and what we here in this room can see and have experienced. Just this week, starting on last Tuesday and finishing on Thursday morning, we had a conference in our embassy in Washington, and we brought together scholars, experts on the transatlantic relation, on the relations between the Netherlands and the United States, and we opened that conference with a speech by somebody called Russell Shorto. Russell Shorto is an author, a historian, and has written a wonderful book, Island in the Center of the World. You should all read it. It's good for Russell Shorto's finances, but it's also very good for your insight in transatlantic relations. And Russell Shorto describes how the Netherlands, people from Amsterdam, came to Manhattan, New Amsterdam, in 1609. And he describes not only how we left an impression forever on that part of the world by Brooklyn and all those things that you know, to even the donut, which very few people know is a Dutch invention. I think a typical Dutch invention who could invent a pastry with a hole in the middle. I think that must be a very stingy Dutch person and probably sell it as a whole pastry. But but he also described what kind of values we brought to the New World, and I think that was the most interesting part for many of us. He described the values of tolerance. We at that time were a tolerant country in a sea of intolerance. In Europe, the countries around us were intolerant. They basically were not willing to accept other faith, other people. That's why these people came to us. That's why the new establishment of New Amsterdam was only for 30-40% Dutch, or Dutch nationals, so to say. They were Flemish, but they were Poles, they were Italians, they were all kinds of people of various nationality, of various religions, of various colors. They were what we now would call African Americans. They were slaves, but also freed slaves who had a status in that new colony of New Amsterdam. And we would hope, and he would argue, that that idea of that colony is still there. He also argued, and I think we all know, that our piece of legislation, the Akte van Verlating, and our independence finds its way into the independence of the United States. There are pieces in the independence, that document signed in Philadelphia, which you can trace back to our Akte van Verlating, and especially the idea that you can basically get rid of the king if the king doesn't rule well. You can find back in both documents. So our shared values go a long way. The last thing he argued, and I think is right, and very much interesting at the moment, is religious liberty. The tolerance for many people was religious liberty. I served for 5 years in Belgium. If you come to Ghent, de pacificatie van Ghent. Willem van Oranje, that's his proclamation of what he thinks about religious liberty. And if ever you go there and you meet the burgemeester van Ghent, he will recite the pacificatie van Ghent, I can tell you, by heart. And it's a long, long document. Russell Shorto and our people at the conference pointed to this long relationship and pointed to our long, long friendship. But of course, the conference went or talked about, are we going to be able to sustain that relationship? Will the relationship be the same under the circumstances that we have now? Because President Trump has spoken harshly about NATO. NATO was a thing of the past, obsolete. He has spoken harshly about the European Union, and I can tell you, not only President Trump speaks harshly about the European Union. If you talk to the Republican Party, they will tell you that the model of the European Union, according to them, is a thing of the past. And they are more than willing to help us to get rid of that thing of the past and show us the way to something else. The fact, of course, that Nigel Farage was the first European to be received in Trump Tower by the then, at that moment, president-elect, does not help. The President, Donald Trump, has campaigned on the idea, I am the Brexit guy for you Americans. He has embraced that idea of the nation state that is better than what is set above it, in this case, the European Union. However, I think that the new circumstances oblige us to take a second look at our relationship with the United States, but take a second look on the basis of the need to maintain a cooperation with the United States. We cannot cut our ties with the United States because of the importance of the United States for us strategically, security-wise, economically. But also, I would say, we need to approach the United States with confidence. Confidence that sometimes, I think, from time to time is lacking. We have an amazing amount to offer to the United States. And I think we should start with that. We are who we are. We have our values. Let's articulate our values. We have talked in our embassy about rewriting the narrative towards the United States. And my idea would be to start rewriting the narrative by who we are, what we stand for, and then with an open hand and outstretched hand, go to the United States and say, are you willing, and we are very much willing, to work with you on the basis of what we are. Having said that, let me talk a little bit about the 45th President of the United States and the elections. 2016 elections was a first in many, many ways. You have a total outsider, Donald Trump, who takes on the establishment in Washington, which is Hillary Clinton. She is the absolute establishment of Washington. You see also a man, Donald Trump, who takes over a political party. This is no longer party politics of the Republican Party. This is personality politics. I think back on the introduction of Donald Trump by his daughter Ivanka, who says when she comes to the podium, I'm actually not a Republican, I'm not a Democrat either, I'm a Trump, and I vote for this man, Donald Trump. I'm not voting for the Republican Party, I vote for my father because, and then she gives the reasons why she thinks everybody should vote for him. We have seen a very disturbing thing, which I think we all call by now factory politics. And I will go on to that a little bit deeper, but at a certain moment in the Washington Post, they have this thing called a fact checker, where they check all the facts in a speech. And at a certain moment, they found out on the basis of the fact checker that in all the official speeches of Donald Trump, he told a lie every 5 minutes, which is an amazing average, I can tell you. And basically, the falsehood, the untruth, were equivalent to all the untruths by all the other candidates combined, being Hillary Clinton, but also all the other ones he battled in the Republican primaries. We have seen another fact, the foreign influence on the election process, never seen before. There was a foreign power, which is well established by now. All the intelligence agency in Washington will tell you so, who have influenced these elections. To what extent, nobody knows. I can tell you nobody will start to reconstruct that and basically say, you know what, this cost Hillary Clinton so many votes. But it's very interesting to note that despite all what they say about popular vote and state vote and whatever, if we go by state vote and by the electoral college, the 3 states that matter in the end for Hillary Clinton are Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. The combined advantage of these 3 states for Donald Trump is 78,000 votes. That's nothing. He won by 78,000 votes. If those 78,000 votes were gone the other way, Hillary Clinton would be in the White House by now. Which means that if there was foreign influence, we will never know, but that might have made a difference. The last point I think which is very important was the media. The relentless attack on the media, which I think has also influenced very much the outcome of the vote. And if you would have thought of a scenario like that before, you would have never believed it. But it played out, and I think it's very important for us in Europe, who are on the verge of elections, very important elections, starting in the Netherlands, France, probably somewhere Italy in between, and Germany. We have the same problems in a legal point of view that the United States faced during their elections. I want to go a little bit deeper on 2 or 3 of the points that I made, and I would start with information. Barack Obama has won his elections in 2004 and 2008, 2012 on the basis of his ability to use modern IT, to use Twitter, Facebook, and whatever. But he used that medium to basically send out his message, to multiply his message millions of times, so he could have a much wider reach for his message. And that was basically a convening power of the use of media. That convening power has been lost in these elections in 2 ways. First of all, the division in news channels. The difference in news channels in the United States is by now stark. If you switch from Fox News to MSNBC, and you do that every 5 minutes, at the end of the hour you will be totally bonkers. Because you will see 2 parallel worlds. The world of MSNBC is a world totally different from the world of Fox News. And who are you to choose? How do you know as a simple citizen, which one is right and which one isn't. And what you see then, that people start to live in their own news bubble. They basically settle on one news bubble. And if you can tap into that news bubble with your IT savvy, your tweets, your Twitters, your Facebook page, and whatever, and you can enhance that message, you drive those people in one direction. So the Trump voters went from Fox News, from Hannity on Fox News, to the web page, the Facebook page of Donald Trump for president, to his tweets, and were enforced and reinforced by the ideas that they found on those messages, on those channels. Very scary, because you see that people start to act on the basis of false assumptions. We have seen something very close to my home, at a pizzeria, where on Connecticut Avenue there was a total false message that Hillary Clinton was involved in running a pedophilia ring out of this pizzeria. Total nonsense. Result is that somebody in North Carolina takes it upon himself to investigate. He investigates in the American way. He gets his AK-47 out, takes his car, and goes to the pizzeria. Basically shoots up the pizzeria, doesn't find anything because there is no pedophilia ring run by Hillary Clinton in the pizzeria. The scary thing was that the son of General Flynn, who is now National Security Advisor, not only retweeted this news, and he was in the transition team, but also General Flynn himself retweeted it without saying it was not true. The son even went further and said, without proof to the contrary, this must be true. That is scary messaging, and that is scary messaging knowing that if you say these kind of things and you say these kind of things to a group of followers, they will believe you, and as was shown by the guy from North Carolina, they will act on it. Secondly, the hacking scandal. There is a foreign nation who has hacked into the T.M.C. website and has basically used WikiLeaks to distribute news again and again and again. And the fact that this was an orchestrated fact, we could see, because at a certain moment, and that was coming in a month before the election, and then every day, 2,000 hacked messages from John Podesta, the manager of Hillary Clinton's campaign, were released through WikiLeaks. Every day, 2,000. Every day, 2,000 again and again and again. This was an orchestrated campaign. These people knew that what they were doing. This was not a dump, what we have tens of thousands of messages from John Podesta. No, every day 2,000 in order that they could stay in the news for a month again and again and again. I think, and I'm totally honest in that, I think we have to be very careful with that here too. We have exactly the same situation. We probably have exactly the same country who would be interested in our elections, and we have exactly the same possibilities here to do something like that. Second, I think, third very important thing is what we learned through these elections is how incredibly fed up the American population is with what they see as the establishment. As Donald Trump said, and I was present at the inauguration and at his rather amazing inaugural address, and if you were looking at the podium, I was sitting to the right and Congress was sitting to the left. And I can tell you the blame was distributed equally between the left and the right, and that the left Congress was the establishment. And what Donald Trump said about the establishment is basically what Americans feel about the establishment. Nothing gets done in Congress. There's a whole industry around Congress, a lobbying industry, who make a lot of money, live in luxury, and the result of that is absolutely nothing. Nothing is done for the little guy in Alabama or in Mississippi or in Kentucky, and the guys in Washington are just getting richer and richer. And that he has played on it with gusto, and he has, by painting Hillary Clinton as part of that establishment, he has gained an enormous advantage. Let me say one other thing about the popular vote. The Democrats, of course, claim, and everybody claims, she has won the popular vote. She did. Close to 3 million people more voted for Hillary Clinton than for Donald Trump. Donald Trump now claims that that number, if not more, were illegal votes, people who were in the country illegally or who were dead, which is, I can tell you, I once spoke to Cokie Roberts, some of you might know, a famous journalist from Louisiana, who told me in Louisiana we bury our dead people above ground because that makes them easier to count during election time. So it is something that we are not totally unfamiliar with in the United States. However, let's also bear in mind that elections are organized by the state secretary, the secretary of state of every state. Majority of state is in Republican hands, and all those secretary of states have vouched for the integrity of their elections. So they basically, Donald Trump is being rebuffed by people from his own party, from his Republican party, saying that was not true. But more important, you have an electoral system in the United States. This is not a democracy like ours. This is a federation of states, and a federation of states on a purpose. The founding fathers who conceived the electoral system because already at that time they knew that there would be big states and smaller states. There would be an accumulation of people on the coast, richer people. At that time, especially, of course, the state of New York and the city of New York, and they conceived of this system with a purpose. The small states who were asked to join the federation built this system in order to protect their interests. So the idea of saying, you know what, you have to abolish the electoral college vote, I don't think will not fly. All the states in the middle, and with right reason, will vote against it and will say, you know what, this was the purpose. This is what our founding father meant to do. We are a federation of states. We were asked to join this federation, and this was our safety. Let's see a little bit about what I think Donald Trump will do. Which is partly what you came here for. I think he will be, especially in his first 3 months, 6 months, an inward-looking president. He has one main problem, which is the elections in 2 years' time, and he has a main problem is what he has promised to his people in his inaugural address, in his campaign. He has to deliver. And in all honesty, a person in Alabama doesn't care that much about NATO or about the European Union or whatever. The person in Alabama cares about how much money he makes, the future of his children, his health care. Those are the items that he will care for. So I think that's what he will concentrate on. He inherits an enormous debt. The state debt of the United States is more or less the same size as his gross national product, which is enormous. And everybody knows, and he knows, this is a guy who went bankrupt 6 times. He knows that as he has a debt which is more than 100% of the value of his property, that he basically will go bust. So he sees that, and I think nobody can blame him that he will try to organize this. How do I avoid bankruptcy for my country, unlike he did for his casino in Atlanta? He has to honor a number of pledges. First of all, his Supreme Court appointment. The religious right, the evangelicals, voted for him massively. Why do you vote for a man with a track record if you are an evangelical with a track record like Donald Trump? This was the reason. He will appoint our Supreme Court justice. They want to have a conservative in the molds of Scalia, the justice who died. And the only guarantee that they had for getting such a justice back was Donald Trump. They don't like Donald Trump at all, but they have that guarantee, and he will have to honor on that guarantee, and he will do so. He will do so. He will do, and I think he will come very soon with an appointment, and he's already threatening the Democrats in the Senate, who are a minority but can filibuster his appointment, what he will do to them if they filibuster his appointment. And I can tell you, in 2 years' time, with the elections of the Senate coming up, and by far the majority of seats to be contested are Democratic seats, there are a lot of jittery Democrats in the Senate who can be persuaded to play along with the president. You have seen already, he will do something about immigration. Very firm pledge. Who will pay for the wall? Everybody shouts the Mexicans. Maybe that payment will be a little bit more diffuse, but he will build the wall. That was the pledge. He will have to do so. If he doesn't do it, he will be his base will be totally disappointed. And you have seen the first executive order already in order to pave the ground for the wall. He will repeal Obamacare. You saw the first executive order. Interestingly enough, he has made it very clear, I will not repeal Obamacare if there is not something else in place. He will not just repeal Obamacare and put 20 million people on the street without health care. How he can do that, or how he wants to do that, he has to work with Congress to find a solution. He will basically recalibrate the tax system. Actually, something that a lot of people thought Obama should have done some time ago. The United States has 35% corporate tax. The average corporate tax in Europe is around 20%. They are totally out of step with Europe. There's no, the reason why you have an Apple judgment by the court, the case brought by the Commission, is because of that. There is this huge discrepancy because between corporate tax in Europe and corporate tax in the United States. He will do something about it, and he will also do something. He will basically make the tax structure in the United States much simpler. The tax code in the United States dates back to 1986. Whoever is president, it's high time for a revision of the tax code. By the way, we have seen in the Netherlands see what happened here in our country about one and a half year ago, how difficult it is to make a big tax restructure. Brings me to my last point on that. He needs Congress. You can rule by executive order up to a certain extent. Executive order in its scope is limited, in its duration is limited, because it can be overthrown. He needs Congress. For his big legislation, he needs Congress. The most interesting people for us at the moment in the United States, apart from the people who will probably be in his administration, are a number of senators, Republican senators, in the Senate. He is not universally liked by his Republican party. There are a number of senators, like McCain, like Rubio, like Lindsey Graham, like Rob Portman, who do not like him, who have been elected now, who have 6 years to go, and might be basically sort of scheming and counting their options for something else. I think that, well, McCain, I think, is on his last term. He is close to 80, if he's not 80. I think he will do 6 more years, and that will be it. Lindsey Graham has ambitions himself. He ran for president. Marco Rubio definitely has ambitions himself. He ran for president. Those are contravening powers, and I think that the check that the legislative branch has always been on the executive branch and vice versa, you will see now operate again, despite the fact that the Republicans control the House, control the Senate, and control the presidency, so control the legislative and control the executive. There is enough dissent in the Republican Party that I think the legislative will play its part and will not give in to everything that the executive, the president, wants. Foreign policy, I think, is really too early to tell. I've sat in most of the hearings of people involved in foreign policy, Rex Tillerson, General Mattis, Jim Mattis, what's his name? The guy, Hadley, I think. No, I forgot his name. For Homeland Security, Kelly. Yeah. What struck me was the ease with which they digressed from the script of the president. There are different forces here at play. And I think it will be very interesting to see in the near future how he will govern. Will he be a president who will start to manage and maybe micromanage, or will he be a CEO who basically sets the parameters and then basically gives the secretaries the authority within those parameters to act? With, of course, what we expect in Washington, the possibility that if you do not do what he wants and you go outside the parameters, the word is you will be fired. You're fired. So I think that is something that might well be expected, but that is something that I think would suit us fine. What we have heard from Mattis, also what we have heard from Tillerson, is basically not very much different from a normal Republican administration, a Bush administration, be it Bush 41 or Bush 43. This is, and they were not, for foreign policy, except for the Iraq adventure, were not very bad, were rather interventionist administration. Lastly, I want to come back to what I said before about our own point of view. What we noticed at our conference of the last 2 days was a unisono voice of our American participants saying two things. A, you have a lot to offer. You are a country. We had Mary Landrieu, senator, former senator from Louisiana, who told about her experience after Katrina, how the Netherlands came in. We helped to rebuild, but we helped to rebuild, in any case, the defenses, the water defenses of New Orleans. And basically what she said, the history of New Orleans is French, the future of New Orleans will be Dutch. This is what we want to see. We will help them, and not only do we do that in New Orleans, we have the same program in New York after Sandy. We are working now in Norfolk. We are going to work in Miami Beach. We have, in the fields of water, we have this country an amazing amount to offer. We are good in smart cities. We have made a big push recently with a circular economy. We have sold the Americans on circular economy not from an environmental point of view, but from a money-maker point of view. And that's the moment you get them interested. This is not, I'm not a EPA guy, I'm a money-maker guy. You can make money out of a circular economy. And lastly, I think that the foundations of our cooperation, the value base, is still there. You do not change the foundation of our cooperation by a presidential election. You don't even do that by the fact that probably close to half, or 45% of the electorate supported this president. I think what we have, based on more than 400 years of cooperation, is unique. And as long as we stick to our base, and as long as we tell them these were the values on which we have worked with you together, these are the things we have to offer. And what I said again, what I said before, we come to you with an outstretched hand, but with a firm hand, and a hand based on what we think is important in our relationship. I think we can look at our relationship, the transatlantic relationship, with confidence. And like a great politician said last week, we are willing to let America go first as long as we are second. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your insights, Ambassador Schuwer, and also for your optimism in the long run. May I invite the members of our first panel to join me on the stage? In the interest of expedience, I will introduce our speakers briefly. Hubert Smeets, a specialist on Russia, a journalist for NRC Handelsblad, and a visiting scholar at the University of Amsterdam. And he's a member of Raam op Rusland, a collective that writes in-depth articles about Russia. And his last book, De Wraak van Poetin, The Revenge of Putin, was published last year at the publishing house Prometheus Bert Bakker. André Gerrits, Professor of International Studies and Global Politics at Leiden University. You held the chair in Russian History and Politics in Leiden, and your main interests are world politics, Russian domestic and international politics, and EU external relations, which have suddenly, in the last couple of years, gotten a whole new push.
Sure.
Your last book was Nationalism in Europe Since 1945, also published in 2015. Lisbeth Lijnsaat, extraordinary professor practice of international law at Maastricht University, and the legal advisor of the Netherlands Ministry of Foreign Affairs, specializing in general international law, and you have acted as the agent for the Netherlands in cases before the International Court of Justice, the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, and the International Criminal Court of General International Law. In this first panel, we will be looking at Well,
Sigh.
it says something that immediately creates so many relations in my mind. What is the worldview of Trump as a salesman, as a corporate deal maker? Let's talk about his view of international politics in relationship to a number of countries. And I wanted to start first, given all the news that we've seen recently about the role of Russia in the recent elections, talking about the first about the U.S. and Russia relations. Putin and Trump, palsy-walsy, you might say. Is this a real new axis? Is this an entente? Is this an alliance? André Gerrits, how would you describe this relationship?
Well, nobody knows yet. I mean, there are a lot of, let's say, there are a lot of things to say about Trump, what he probably wants, despite the fact that nobody knows. But as someone said, you should take him seriously, but should not take him literally. I think that is how you should approach Donald Trump. As far as Russia is concerned, that might be one of the few positive aspects of his emerging foreign policy agenda. I don't believe in any sort of Männerfreundschaft between the two. I don't think it makes much of a difference. To the best of my knowledge, they never met. And if they do, they meet as two presidents, not as two pals that don't know each other yet. But I think there are very many arguments in favor of reformulating US-Russia policies. I mean, the Russophobia...
Now or even before now?
Well, even before now,
Even
but
before.
now, I mean, even before now is too late. So we're
But
talking
I mean,
about.
there was a necessity even before now.
Oh yeah, sure, for sure. Yeah, there was a sort of a Russophobia in the among the political elite in the United States, and partly also to a lesser extent in Europe, I think, which was utterly unhelpful and detrimental also to the interests of Europe. So, I mean, I could come up with a lot of pessimistic notes. I'm less optimistic than the ambassador, as a matter of fact, as far as Putin's foreign policy is concerned. I mean, basically, his inaugural lecture was the most radical departure from American foreign policy by any new president after the Second World War, given by a president who is less experienced in foreign policy matters than any other president of the United States after the Second World War. That's a very dangerous combination, obviously. So I wouldn't be too optimistic. But given your specific question about Russia, I think that might be one of the very few positive aspects of his foreign policy agenda.
Hubert, do you share that optimism?
Yes, through the eyes of Putin, I share the optimism of André Gerrits. Yeah, for sure. Trump is called in Russia at the moment already Nash President, our president. And the word Nash is very important because also the Crimea is Nash, is ours. So they are very, very, very grateful that Trump now is president of the United States, and especially because he promised to make a deal on the Crimea, one of the main priorities of the Russian Federation at the moment, at least to get a de facto recognition of the annexation of the Crimea. And second, he's very important for the Russian Federation at the moment, foreign policy of the Russian Federation, because the main target of the Russian foreign policy is to divide and rule Europe, the European Union. And Trump is from the United States doing the same kind of thing. So there is reason to be very optimistic from the side and with the glasses of a Russian observer. My personal opinion is not that important at the moment. Not yet.
Oh.
Perhaps later on.
Okay. But at least I can say that I don't understand why the Russophobia was that a big deal in Russia at the moment. It was just a propagandistic instrument to, let's say, to rearrange a narrative on the main enemy of Russia already for almost 1 century. That's the United States of America. The United States of America are the real competitor for the Russian Federation, for Russia. Europe isn't. And if they can, together with Trump...
The real competitor?
For Russia are the United States. Yeah. That the United States, America is the mirror for Russia to define itself. So Germany isn't. France isn't. Perhaps apart from the French Revolution, but that's already more than 2 centuries ago. So America is the mirror for Russians. And the Russians define themselves as anti-American, but that is the same mirror, as you understand, as I am clear at least. So I think that in Moscow they have reason to be very optimistic, yeah. There are some reasons for skepticism, but the bottom line is optimism.
So do you think Putin would dream of emulating Trump in his role as what the ambassador called CEO?
No, I think that you have to understand that America is for Russia not important as a trade partner. America is just the opposite, the other party in the other nuclear power, for example. The real interest for Russia at the moment lays in Europe, to divide and rule, as I said already, and therefore they can use Trump, and we will see next year with all the elections in Europe. So don't mix up his, let's say, the propaganda of America as the antidote and the antipode of Russia with concrete interests for Russia. They have not that much interests in America. The only thing you could say is an interest is this nuclear power, nuclear energy, nuclear weaponry. That could be important for Russia. If Trump would follow the line of Obama to reduce the nuclear armament in the world, then Trump could become very fast an enemy of the Russian Federation, because the nuclear armament is the only thing Russia has at the moment
So this
to compete with the United States.
This relationship is brittle.
Yeah.
And could be very temporary.
Yeah, could be.
Nino, we have a question here. Could you stand and say your name, please?
Felix Waldenberg. From my part, primarily the question regarding the United Nations. Any resolutions which would be issued against the United States for human rights violations could be countered with a veto. How do you see the United Nations resolving such inefficiencies? And without primarily a signature or ratification of the International Criminal Court Statute of Rome, we cannot even try them for genocide or crimes against humanity. So what is the real issue on a more law and order statute through international law on that matter? Because they are pretty much unaccountable for.
Is your question for Hubert Smeets?
No, primarily for the madam up there regarding foreign affairs and judicial issues.
I think that's a nice way to be addressed, the madam. Right. Now, I think that it is important to first of all keep in mind that the criminality of genocide or crimes against humanity does not necessarily rely on being a party to the International Criminal Court. We would like all states to join the International Criminal Court. This is the Dutch view, and that's a view shared by many other states. But the criminality of such acts does not depend on ratifying the Rome Statute. Now, we know, we've seen, and I forget when it was, we've seen the Bush administration unsign the Rome Statute. Recently, Russia has done the same, but it doesn't change a thing about the fact that those remain the most serious international crimes. And that means that the way in which to address those states is to say, well, even if you're not a party to the Rome Statute, we want to be certain that those crimes, war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, can be prosecuted in your domestic legal system and will be prosecuted in your domestic legal system. I have no doubt at all about the fact that that is possible in the American legal system. I'm not a scholar of American criminal law, but it is. Is it still on? Okay, but it is something that is embedded in the American legal system. So in that respect, I have no doubt, and I don't think there are indications that that is going to change. That's a different thing with respect to the comments on waterboarding that I thought were very worrying. At the same time, I would say that people like the new Minister of Defense, the Secretary of State, they don't seem to adhere to that view. And there, I think, what is important in the way in which states act in the international legal domain, they will be relying on their internal advice. And I would say that irrespective of who is the legal advisor of the United States, we do not know yet. I haven't heard a name so far. But there is a very well-equipped and wise legal division known as L for some reason. And it's about 200 lawyers or something like that. And they will be at the administrative core of the Department of State and will be continuing their work as usual, whereas really political legal decisions, directions, that will depend on appointing the legal advisor.
And as Ambassador Schuwer mentioned, this is one of the many sources of disagreement within Trump's cabinet. And of course, we're all very curious to see how those differences of opinion will play out. I'm curious to hear your views on what Trump's election will mean for the peace process in Syria, for example.
Well, I think the most important thing is that America is not immediately involved at the moment in the peace process. I mean, that's one of the diplomatic gains of the Putin presidency, the fact that they have these negotiations going on, well, not exactly in Russia, but in Kazakhstan, but in any way, with, let's say, the Russian sphere of influence. And the United States is simply not present.
Should it be, André?
Of course it should be present. I mean, the point is, so should Russia. Russia now is by far the most important foreign actor in the Syrian civil war, because it's the only actor which is really there in the military sense of the word. I'm not a Putinite at all, as a matter of fact, but every now and then you have to admit let's say, the gains or the positive dimensions of a country's diplomacy and foreign policy. I mean, it speaks to the sophistication of Russian diplomacy, that it is involved in the Syrian conflict, more so than we have ever been. It has more impact.
Would you call that sophistication?
No, without really jeopardizing the relations with other countries in the Middle East. The Russian Federation
America's done that too, but with a policy called no boots on the ground.
No, of course, but America wasn't involved in the Syrian... I mean, the worst thing you can do, as far as I know, I'm not a diplomat, is to make loud statements and not to act. That's basically what the Obama administration did, which, of course, had a tremendously negative impact on America's credibility in the region, among friends and foes, as a matter of fact. And Putin is a totally different president. I mean, he doesn't give a damn. He has no scruples. He's a different kind of politician. I mean, different from Obama.
Did you say Putin or did you say Trump?
Trump, I don't know. I mean, the point is, we don't know what Trump will do, but we do know that he has almost a totally different world outlook than his predecessors.
Does he have a world view, André?
Of course he has.
Does he have a view that extends beyond America?
Of course. One of the most remarkable things, listening to Trump reading his inaugural lecture, he doesn't make a distinction anymore between friends and foes. Foes, or let me put it differently, friends have as much to fear from Trump's presidency, at least so far, up till now, than foes have. That's one. Secondly, politics, I think, in Trump's perception is a sort of a zero-sum game. You either lose or win. So there is no longer this broader American definition of national security, which says that national security of the United States is linked to this global liberal order, whatever you want to call it. So definitely he has a view on global policy, and unfortunately not the most pleasant one.
Okay.
Yeah, and that view is...
It's not incomparable to Putin's.
Not at all.
No.
No, because both are, let's say, appealing to a nostalgic revolution. And there is a revolution going on.
That's what every nationalist is doing.
Yes, okay, but not every nationalist is quite that revolutionary in his attitude as Trump perhaps will be, and as Putin is already. And they are both appealing to the nostalgia, to the nostalgic desire for let's say the 60s in Russia as in the United States, and they are very successful with this appeal. And the appeal of Putin in Europe is threefold and is in some ways the same appeal as the appeal
I
of
get a
Trump.
strong feeling that Putin is hijacking this discussion.
Yes, because
Well, you posed the question.
yeah, because his appeal is anti-Islam, his appeal is anti-Brussels, anti-Europe, and his appeal was till last year anti-American, and that appeal is very strong in this nostalgic revolution.
We have questions. The gentleman at the back row.
Yes, thank you. My name is Willem Oosterveld. I'm a strategic analyst with the Hague Center for Strategic Studies. Just to come back to the discussion about a possible deal between Trump and Putin, I can understand what Putin might want to get from Trump, but I don't yet understand what Trump might be interested in to get from Putin. I mean, obviously, Trump has been saying, well, perhaps we can do some kind of nuclear deal, although I'm not entirely sure with respect to the intricacies, like why he would actually be interested in that in the first place. However, I could imagine that Trump might want to get some more support with the Russians when it comes to dealing with Iran or when it comes to dealing with China. Now, exactly, I don't think these are two countries where Trump is too much interested in actually getting into the American camp rather than trying to remain friends with these countries.
Is your question for one of the panel members?
Whoever feels most fit to answer the question. Thank you.
Who?
It's a good question. It's difficult to say. I don't see why it would be in Trump's interest, apart from the Russians keeping the compromise to themselves. This rapprochement between the United States and Russia. I mean, I see one overall global positive point, and that is that Trump might be interested in restoring workable relations between the United States and Russia. I mean, Russia is a very important country, globally speaking, so it's in the America's interest to have workable relations with Russia. But otherwise, I agree, Russia has more to win from Putin than the other way around. Yeah.
Sir, please.
My name is Kasimir Kostov and I come from Bulgaria. I would like, because I did not understand the point about the Russophobia, I would like to ask Professor Gerritz if he thinks Donald Trump is a Russophile. And because these days we are going to have a very important visit to the White House, in fact the first European leader will see the new American president, the lady with the permissive name invites the United States to start ruling the world together. So I logically want to ask the question, who from the rest of the European leaders will be working with Donald Trump during his presidency? Because this is high-level presidential politics. And so far as I understand, we're discussing that right now. And about the international law part of it, do you think that if we expect these United States administration to be more lenient towards breaking international law by a permanent, by a country permanent member of the Security Council, does that mean that we can expect more such events in the future? Thank you. I meant Crimea.
Mm-hmm.
Nina, over here, please. Lisbeth, is this something you can address?
Well, I would say we don't expect the Security Council to be explicitly lenient with respect to violations of international law. I mean, international law is at the heart of the UN system. So I would hesitate to think that in any way violations of international law would be condoned by the Security Council. The other question is, though, and I think I would like to flip it around, it's another issue for debate, whether the Security Council is the organ most equipped to ensure the proper application of international law.
If not so, then who?
Well, just around the corner, International Court of Justice. I mean, it is there in the system. So yes, I think violations of international law are a matter of great concern. I'm not sure if in every possible case the Security Council will be the best organ to address them.
Sir?
My name is Robert Siekman, former cooperate. I worked here at the Asso Institute in the past, also international
Could you
law.
keep the microphone closer?
International law, and I worked in Asso Institute in the past in public international law and sports law. A former professor at Rotterdam University in sports law. Yesterday evening I saw at CNN, on CNN, a very interesting speech by Miss May of the United Kingdom. And that was, in my opinion, I hope that the panelists will say what I think about it. You have to hear the whole speech. It was a great one for me, because she said we want to cooperate with the United States, and we should take the lead with the United States, United Kingdom, as in the past, and not be inward-looking, and strengthen NATO. So, and she mentioned several times the position of the Baltic states. And here in Europe, even in Western Europe, we are very inward-looking too. We have to look into the real situation and look at the threat to the Baltic states, for example, by Russia. These are the facts. And this was mentioned not by me, but by Miss May, Theresa May. So the test is for the cooperation, one of the tests is for the cooperation in future between the United States and the United Kingdom is how Mr. Trump will react to that. I think I'm very pessimist about Mr. Trump, because this is a guy who will always do what he wants to do. And he will take all measures he thinks are necessary. You know, that is it. So we should take that into account.
Okay,
and there is no difference with Mr. Putin. And I'm very disappointed about the position of the West looking to Aleppo. We're all talking about politics on Syria, but the poor people who were bombarded at Aleppo by the Syrian forces supported by Russia, which is a fact.
Yes.
That is important for the people on the ground. That is important. And I think that Mr. Trump should not only do his job for the working people in the United States, but for the poor people in the whole world, like the United States did in the past.
The Marshall Plan. Yeah.
Well,
the Baltic states.
The problem, of course, is these
NRC had an excellent series by our correspondent in Russia, traveling through the Baltic states, seeing which preparations they're making for what I think indeed everyone sees coming.
Oh yeah.
Well,
everyone might be. I don't know what you see coming.
For what everyone fears coming.
I don't know. I mean, these aren't two known unknowns. You say Russian. I forgot which terminology exactly you used. But Russian aggression towards the Baltic countries is a fact. It's not a fact. I mean, there is. No, you use another word.
Yes.
A threat is a fact. Yeah. Okay. I don't know if that threat is a fact. And the second unknown is how Trump will respond to it. I think it's a wrong way of looking at potential conflict in the Baltic states. Potential conflict in the Baltic states will not be about Russians invading, with or without insignias invading the Baltic states. It will be indeed, if it comes to a conflict between Russia and any of the Baltic states, it will be of the hybrid sort that we have seen and are still witnessing in the eastern part of Ukraine. That type of conflict will never be. The NATO will never respond, let's say, offensively militarily to these kind of conflicts. So there is no need to invoke Article 5 or anything. The situation is much more complex than that.
I know, having visited Estonia and the Baltic states this past summer, that, for example, the Estonians are particularly afraid that Putin will come in and defend his compatriots because he feels that the Estonians are not giving them full civilian privileges and rights, for example, not giving them a passport. And that this will be a sort of subterranean hostile act, which will not be enough for NATO to react, but will be enough to give him a foothold.
It's possible, of course it's possible, yeah. I don't deny the possibility. I don't think it's very likable, but...
What would have to happen for NATO to intervene on behalf of the Baltic states?
Well, first of all, a request by any of the Baltic governments, I guess, and that request should be the response to full military aggression. And not this, I mean, as disturbing as, and as unwelcome as it is, but not this sort of hybrid sort of hybrid warfare which Putin is.
Under the radar warfare.
Of course, yeah, that's what
We
he will
have
be doing.
A question from Janne Nijman, the director of the Osser Institute.
Thank you, Tracy. Yeah, follow up a bit on the international law justifications of intervention, one could say. I would like to invite Lisbeth Leinze to maybe reflect a bit on the humanitarian interventions or the justifications of intervention through human rights language that has been part of our past couple of years. And of course, Hillary Clinton was pushing for intervention in Libya with that kind of language. It was controversial to some extent in Europe. How do you see international law language and notions and norms come in on these type of issues?
Well, first of all, I think you only get. I think we only get into a discussion about humanitarian intervention in a situation in which one state is willing to take action. So I'm not sure if at the moment, from the way I have been following what Mr. Trump has been saying, whether there is any likelihood of getting into a situation like that, because the whole debate about humanitarian intervention, it has a legal component as to whether or not intervention is possible in spite of the fact that you have not been invited by the state concerned and there is not a situation of self-defense, but there is a willingness on the part of one state to act on behalf of the population of that other state, in spite of the government of that other state not taking action itself. Now, that I think is most of all a situation that will arise in a situation where you have a proactive government who says, on account of a number of moral considerations, humanitarian considerations, we find it unacceptable that this and this is happening in that state, and we as an outsider are going to put a stop to that. The way I have been following discussions and the views of Mr. Trump, I haven't picked up any specific aspect of a sort of a moral consideration with respect to foreign policy. That is what is sort of the starting point of humanitarian intervention. So I somehow think it's
You're putting
difficult,
that very discreetly,
difficult to
Lisbeth.
imagine how we would get there. Once we get there, we can return to the were they invited and is it legitimate debate. I don't think we're there, but maybe I have misunderstood you.
In the sense that I wanted to link it to the end of the liberal legal order, or the liberal order that we started with, and that in the past few years, liberal interventionism was part of policy that one identifies indeed rather with Clinton than with Trump. So in that sense, I thought that the indications of Trump's foreign policy are indeed leading in that direction, and linking it back to what kind of legal order or world order are we going to. So I indeed agree fully with your legal analysis, and was wondering how that shapes and will shape. Thank you.
Trump has already said, of course, that R2P is completely out of the question. But I think you're right. I would also link it to that global liberal order, to which we are saying goodbye, as a matter of fact. There are all kinds of indications that show that this global liberal order, which is essentially, of course, America-made and America-based, and extremely beneficial to large parts of the world, including ours. But I think that Trump, again, has a different way of looking at these kind of, and even Theresa, yeah, said yesterday that we should definitely stop intervening into the domestic affairs of other countries for reasons of democracy promotion or anything, which is also another symptom of this very same pattern, I think.
We have a question here from Hans Weijers.
I have a question for the panel. The central theme is war and peace under the Trump administration, and Mr. Trump seems to be somewhat of a loose cannon. So the question to the panel is, let's assume that a situation develops in the course of the next couple of years where there is something of a trade war going on between China and the United States, not very unlikely probably. And at the same time, let's say either North Korea gets unstable or that in the South Chinese Sea around the islands things starts to heat up. How exactly, how does the system work in the States to control to a certain degree this loose cannon, if at all?
I.e. we're testing the boundaries of our balance of power. Hubert, no?
No.
Well, I mean, the American president cannot just declare war on another country. I'm not familiar with the legal, more than niceties, but with the legal aspects of it. There will not be a war, I guess, between China and the United States. There are very mixed signals towards China, as far as I know. I don't know who it was. Maybe the new Minister of Foreign Affairs, who was rather confrontational towards China concerning China's expansion in the South China Sea. At the very same time, the withdrawal of the United States from TPP, which was specifically designed to keep China out, is of course, I guess, very welcome to China. So mixed signals, I would argue. I don't know if he's really a loose cannon. I think there are more than enough checks and balances for the time being. That's also why I don't like the comparison between Trump and Putin or Trump and Erdogan. I think the political system in the States is still very difficult.
Okay, thank you. Next question. We have several more questions. You and then the gentleman from the U.S. Embassy.
Hello. I'm from the Embassy of Romania. I have a question under the title, perhaps, War and Peace under the Trump administration, and general global security and the Security Council, because it's been brought up recently in this discussion. As we have learned, there may be a draft, another
Can you please speak better into the microphone?
An executive order, a draft executive order, maybe under preparation in America, auditing and reducing U.S. funding of international organizations, which calls for at least 40% overall reduction of the U.S. contribution to international organizations. Of course, this may severely impact, including the UN agencies, also the Security Council being a UN, part of the UN. And how do you see this? It's a bit of a contradiction somehow. I mean, if the U.S. has a big clout, to say the least, a big, considerable clout within the UN overall, it's particularly in the security and, global peace and security.
Your question?
How do you see this, the impact or the effect of if such an executive order turns out to be in the end implemented? If it's signed and implemented, the reduction by at least 40% of the U.S. contribution to international organizations. And I refer specifically to UN organizations and to the peace and security organization.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Lisbeth?
Well, I'm not a financial expert, but if you're a member of the club, you have to pay your contribution. That's sort of a general understanding. And I would say that this has happened before. It has happened before that the US has for a very long time not paid its contribution, and the UN has suffered. So things like regular upkeep of the building wasn't even possible. That very much depends on whether or not the US government, or any other government for that matter, actually sees a point in being a part of the organization and taking its responsibility.
We have just a couple more minutes. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Hans Benendijk. I'm not with the embassy, but I am from Washington. I've spent a good deal of my life working for the U.S. government, and I'm currently at SAIS, Johns Hopkins, and RAND. So I wanted to just very briefly answer the question about checks and balances. I think they are weaker today, but they are there. The checks and balances include the cabinet, the new cabinet, a lot of adults in the new cabinet. It includes the Congress, and I think to a large degree on the Republican side. They provide checks and balances. The press is one of the checks and balances, and that's still pretty healthy. But But I wanted to add that Europe is part and should see itself as part of the checks and balances as well. Europe has a vote. Europe should have a voice. Europe should be engaged in all of this. And I wanted to get the panel's sense of how that could best be done. My own sense is that President Trump is the first American president since Richard Nixon who focuses more on interests than values. You can look at all the presidents since Nixon and they at least express their policies in terms of values. So here we have a president who is focusing on interests fairly narrowly defined. So that tells me that if Europe wants to have a voice and a vote, it's going to have to approach President Trump that way. It's going to have to explain to President Trump that Europe is important. The Netherlands, as Henne said, but Europe as well. It's going to have to figure out how it explains to this new American president that NATO matters. His cabinet secretaries seem to understand that, but he needs to understand it. NATO's going to have to come up with a package before the summit in order to get Trump there, which includes a much greater burden-sharing package. It's going to have to figure out how it can contribute to Trump's design of a new approach to Russia, and so on. So just Europe needs to engage, and it has to do it the right way.
And sell themselves. That's one of the few optimistic things I've heard from various people about the election of Trump is that maybe it's not really that bad a thing that other countries in NATO need to take more responsibility for financing their own defense. Maybe we should have been doing that already. So if we're looking for positive points today, that might be one of them. Jana, can we run over 5 minutes? Is that okay? There's so much to be said. It's so exciting. Yeah. Oh, yes, I'll come to you in a moment, but first the ambassador. Ambassador Sim, could you, the microphone. Could you please stand up so we can see you?
Yeah, okay. I just want to have a very quick question, and that was a bit the point of my talk, but I think that the question is, do you want to engage or do you want to confront? And if you want to confront, are you willing to bear the cost of confrontation? And I think that I would like to hear the opinion of the panel. What do you think the cost will be of confrontation? And in the light of that, would you then rather say, you know what, I'm going to engage? And the speech of Theresa May is engage, very clearly. We engage. We'll try to work with you. We'll try to work from within.
First get out and then engage. Huh?
Well, that's something, but it is very clearly engaged. And I think that I want to hear the opinion of the panel. What is your choice? Engage or confront?
In non-international diplomatic relations speak, we call that a band-aid. Engage or confront? Hubert.
I think that the question is not at the table at the moment because we have elections in the Netherlands, we have elections in France, we have elections in Germany, and maybe we have also elections in Italy. So I think that Europe is not able anyhow to answer this question the next 9 months. So we are out of the tournament for at least 1 year, I think.
That would be fatal.
Yeah, but all the elections in Europe on the continent are elections with a high ideological profile. And in an election campaign with that kind of high ideological profile, this kind of international multilateral or bilateral issues are not at stake, I think. It's pity, but I think it's a fact.
Just as introverted
it's
as the
fact.
US now.
And I think that the question cannot be answered not only because of the elections, but only after the elections we know if Europe will still exist as it exists now. I'm not very optimistic about that, and that's the reason why I would like to postpone the answer for 9 months.
The elections. That's a good idea. Liesbeth, Lijnzaats, engage or confront?
I would say both.
That's a Dutch answer.
Well, and I think we have to keep in mind, not everything is high politics. There are many things where contacts keep going, and I think the example for me personally was during the second period of President Bush, when we had the whole issue about the torture memo, where we had a huge debate about Guantanamo, about the way in which the US was treating suspects and other people engaged in terrorism. There was, I think, at the official public level, really a confrontation with Europe saying quite clearly this is completely unacceptable. If this is, we all want to live by the rule of law, but what you're doing is unacceptable to us, whilst at the same time quite in-depth discussions were going on between lawyers where in which we clarified to each other our points of view, and we had the impression, we, the Europeans, and this is all sorts of different formations of people, of senior civil servants, where we were gradually finding that these discussions helped a number of people in the US government to move away from the extremely harsh approach that they took initially. I'm not saying that that has remedied everything. So things like, let's extend Guantanamo, I'm thinking, oh no, not again. But so for me, it's important to keep contacts, to engage with each other, perhaps behind closed doors, because it does matter and it has some influence. It's not a magic wand, though.
André Gerrits, engage or confront?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a bit of an academic question, which I generally like, of course, academic questions, but it's...
Being an academic?
First, it's way too early to answer that question, and secondly, it's obviously it's not a matter of either engagement or confrontation. It depends on the issue which is on the table. But the bottom line obviously is, and I guess
Trump seems to be much more of the confrontational line.
Yeah, but on what issues? I mean, there are all kinds of potential different issues, and sometimes we might choose for confrontation and sometimes for engagement. And when they are really important issues, as we know from earlier academic administrations, we don't have a say whatsoever. But the bottom line, I think, is engagement. Can't be any different. I mean, the United States is an ally, is a very important ally, our most important ally. We are absolutely interdependently linked with the United States, so confrontation isn't even an option. And if we would choose for confrontation, I don't think we would make a huge impression. But you never know after the YouTube thing.
We have one more question, and that's for the lady over here.
Thank you. My name is Ilse Roose, and I represent the Baltic states, namely Latvia, Embassy of Latvia. I would like to ask my question regarding, again, follow up on NATO. I couldn't fully share your reading on the Baltic states, and also I think that the hybrid threats currently are addressed more broadly, not only to the Baltics, but actually in Europe as such, and there are also articles that could be evoked when in a case of cyber or cyber attacks. But
your question?
My question is, President Trump in his speech named that NATO is obsolete. In the same speech he said NATO is important. So which of the statements and in which perspective in terms of time?
And you expect that these people have the answer?
Why not?
Well, I throw the question.
My answer would be your guess is as good as mine, but maybe our panel members have something more intelligent to say?
Hardly, to be honest. Yeah, no. Well, obviously, I mean, he takes it more seriously than simply the statement NATO is totally obsolete. I mean, even Trump will probably in the end understand that alliances are a relatively cheap way of buying partners and stability and those kind of issues in which he must be interested, because he's a guy who thinks, as you put it, I think in mostly in economic terms or whatever you want, or in financial terms. So it will be probably less dramatic than the obsolete thing. If he ever said that NATO was obsolete, I don't think that he said it, but okay.
Thank you all, and my deep apologies to the people who did not have an opportunity to ask a question. We do have 2 more panels today, so hopefully there will be more opportunities. We're going to stop now for a 15-minute tea break and reconvene here at 5 minutes to 3. Thank you.
All right. You're welcome.
Welcome back. Thank you for joining us for the second part of our really exciting event this afternoon. I want to specifically thank the Asser Institute and the director Janne Nijman for inviting the John Adams Institute to be part of this event. The John Adams Institute is an independent foundation that has as its mission to bring the best and the brightest of American thinking, making, and doing to the Netherlands. We've been doing that for 30 years now. We're celebrating our 30th birthday this year. And I think it's a wonderful institution which I have been affiliated already for many years as a moderator, as a board member, and now as the director. And on our panel, which we will be having in a few minutes, we have with us also the chair of our board, Rut Oldenziel. So we've sort of hijacked this part of the session. And I particularly have hijacked this part of the session because when we were invited to join, I said I'd love to join you as the moderator. And I would also like to tell you something about a subject about America these days, which is really very dear to my heart. I have a tremendous interest in cities and what is happening in cities nowadays all over the world. Over half the world's population lives in cities. The UN says that by 2050, that will be 70% of the world's population. Cities are now where it happens, where the money is earned, where the young people come to find work, to find a partner, to make a career. It's where the pressure is on, where the innovation happens. Cities are really the motors of our world now. And I am particularly interested in cities, and one of the ways in which I manifest that interest is by organizing a talk show and a digital magazine called Stadsleven. And the edition of Stadsleven of last Tuesday was about Trumptown, the conflicting relationship, the vechthuwelijk, we would say in Dutch, between Trump and the American cities. And this is, at the moment, still a domestic issue, but it has international ramifications. And that's why I thought it would be very interesting to tell you something about how this issue is developing. And events are going even faster than we can follow. I'll tell you some more about that in a moment. President Obama was the first president since the 70s who really developed any sort of urban policy. In the time of Obama, before then certainly, and to tell you the truth, even still now, the word urban is synonym with poor and black. There were no presidents who were going to put their heads on the block making an urban policy. Of course, given Obama's background as a street corner worker in Chicago, a community worker, he saw that there were huge issues that needed to be addressed, and he also saw that the cities were an important motor for the economy in America as all over the world. What we now see, and Obama was the first to actually have an urban policy, and he even started a White House Office of Urban Affairs, of which the director was called the City Czar. Czar is more a word that I would associate with Trump and Putin, but maybe there are echoes here that I didn't notice before. What we've seen now, of course, is that Trump is the president of the countryside. It was not the cities who voted for Trump. Even Manhattan, where Trump was born and grew up and started his empire, only 10% of the people voted for him. In Washington, D.C., 4% of the people voted for him. But Trump is going to have to come to terms with the fact that the cities are the place where over 60% of the American population lives, even 80% if you count the sprawling urbanized regions around the actual cities, and where over 80% of the gross national product is earned. And as we all know, Trump is sensitive to economic arguments, so this is something that he is going to have to deal with. Nevertheless, last summer, during the campaign, Trump threatened a number of cities in the U.S. with cutting them off from federal funding. These were the so-called sanctuary cities, cities that said that we are a safe haven for immigrants. We are not going to concur with government policy of actively chasing down illegal aliens and handing them over to the authorities. We feel that we are here to protect these people. We're just not going to do it. The sanctuary city movement also actually dates back to the mid-'80s, when Central America was in the grip of multiple civil wars, and people from Nicaragua, El Salvador, started fleeing to the U.S. as refugees. And there were cities that stuck up for them and called themselves sanctuary cities. Now the sanctuary city movement has gotten new momentum again. And Trump threatened these cities with cutting off their federal funding. What is this going to mean? Now that cities are taking responsibility for defending their immigrants, be they illegal or not, and we're talking about over 11 million people, the undocumented, and many of these people have lived in the US for decades, and their children were born there and have grown up there. And even so, their children still cannot travel, for example, or cannot go to school because they do not have the right papers. I wonder how this relationship is going to develop. I had an interview with Bruce Katz, a scholar at the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C., and he's also the author of a book called The Metropolitan Revolution, which is about how cities have increasingly assumed the role of state government, have even surpassed federal and state government in the sense that they're not able to be hijacked by partisanship as state and national governments are. Bruce Katz says cities are networks. We work together with politics, of course, with government, with universities, with citizens, with business. We are networks, and that gives us the power to move forward in a more conjointed fashion. He actually says that because of this, the working of the market and the market that cities create, the market that cities are, is more important than politics. I found this very heartening. A quote from my interview with Bruce Katz: "Our power resides at the local and metropolitan level. We're about to find out how resilient we are. There will be harm from this new administration. People will be hurt by the scale back of the safety net, but the metropolitan revolution will be the order of the day at the end." And I had hoped, I really saw Trump in action preparing for this talk show last Tuesday. I had been in contact with the mayor of San Francisco, who has been probably the most vocal advocate of the sanctuary city movement ever since the conflict with Trump started to develop this summer. Mayor Lee, and he had agreed before Christmas to give an interview by Skype in the talk show. After Christmas, he had seen that former General Kelly was indeed now the Secretary of Homeland Security, and seeing what that appointment was going to mean, he said, well, I'm sorry, it's really not so opportune anymore for San Francisco to be out profiling itself as the spearhead of the resistance movement to the government. I was shocked. I thought, this is how it works. This is how fear works. Yes, first you're up on the bulwarks promoting your values, and then you see how things develop and you think, well, maybe this is not quite the right moment. And to my surprise, I tried to approach the mayor of Los Angeles, who is also a very prominent member of the Sanctuary City movement. He was unfortunately able to join us, but just last night, his press secretary sent me a statement that Los Angeles has published last night, early this morning for us. And I'd like to quote from that because I thought, this is the other side of the coin. This is Mayor Garcetti of Los Angeles. An open, welcoming, and compassionate spirit is not just an ideal that we try to live up to. It's part of the American character. And perhaps this is really where the conflict is. What is the American character? Are we opening, welcoming, open to new influences and new people, or are we closed in upon ourselves? Those are our values in Los Angeles, and we intend to preserve them no matter what happens in Washington, D.C. It's good, this is good, that we do not actually actively hunt down illegal aliens and turn them over to the police, because trust, the word has been mentioned earlier here today, trust between police and the people they serve is absolutely essential to law enforcement. This would put the personal safety and economic health of our entire nation at risk. It is not the way forward for the United States. And just day before yesterday, Wednesday, President Trump did indeed sign an executive order with the intent to withdraw federal funding for the sanctuary cities, of which there are, depending on how you define them, anywhere between 50 and 200. Mayor Garcetti of Los Angeles himself said that there would indeed be severe economic and public safety repercussions. And the mayor of New York, de Blasio, who said that, oh, no matter what the government says, we're still going to give all our citizens, be they illegal or not, a New York identity card. Now he says the signal of intent from the new president could wipe out every dollar of city savings. And as a matter of fact, San Francisco is exploring whether it can pursue legal action against the federal government if it withholds funds. This is a whole new world. What does this look like? This is new for the legal world. This is new for law enforcement. We've never seen this before, and I think it's a very scary but also very exciting times. One of the things that a lot of cities do, of course, is not wait for government to tell them how the climate is changing and what they should do to protect their citizens. They go ahead and bring in the Dutch, as we heard from Ambassador Schuwer, to help them defend New Orleans, to help them defend New York, all the cities that see that they are prone to climate change, that have already suffered terribly. The Dutch approach is much more long-term. Prevention is always better than repair after the fact. After Sandy, Congress voted $65 billion for repair. Just imagine how much suffering and damage could have been prevented if that money had been spent beforehand. So the cities, the sanctuary cities, I admire their courage. Nobody knows where this battle is leading, but it's something that I will follow closely, as cities are so important to us and to America. The cities say that they will continue to take their climate measures, will continue to bring in the Dutch to help them think what needs to be done. And I hope that this will be an interesting domestic spin-off of what is going to happen as we look at the future of the Paris Agreement, which is the subject of our next panel. Thank you very much. Marcel, you are the climate envoy of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. Does that mean you get to speak to the king often?
Well, that means I also cover the Antilles.
Oh, that's a good perk.
And it's also a way of not putting myself in the compartment of one government department.
That is also a wise move. You spent 4 years in Washington as counselor for international trade and multilateral affairs at the embassy, the Dutch embassy. And prior to your current position, you were responsible for food security in the Netherlands Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Yeah.
Rut Oldenziel, in addition to being the chair of the board of the John Adams, you are a historian, an Americanist, and a writer and scholar of American European history at the Eindhoven University of Technology, where you spearheaded a sustainability agenda with research, education, and campus management in the form of a living lab. I love those. Your latest book was Cycling Cities, the European Experience in 2016. Are you a cyclist yourself?
Just ordinary cyclist. You know, I have a very second-hand bike, and that's what I like about it. Just very ordinary.
Just ordinary, yeah.
Totally ordinary.
So you're not always in Lycra, and you're not a mammal?
No.
Middle-aged men in Lycra?
No.
Middle-aged women in Lycra?
No.
Damien, you are at the Directorate General of Climate at the European Commission since 2000. You're actually from the UK originally, right?
Yes.
But you've lived in Brussels for a long time now.
Yeah.
Yeah. You were head of the unit responsible for the international carbon market, so you were very involved in the Kyoto Protocol, and you're now a special advisor to the director of the Directorate B, European and International Carbon Markets. What does B mean?
A is the international negotiations, B is the policies here in Europe that we've put into place.
Okay, thank you. And Jonathan Verschuurde, you're a professor of law at the Tilburg Law School, University of Tilburg. Your research focuses mainly on the role of international and EU environmental law in legal practice. And your current research is on climate change. You've done a lot of work on adaptation in agriculture, and you are the editor of the Research Handbook on Climate Change Adaptation Law. Okay. the subject of our panel this time, and you know the drill. Put up your hand and we'll do everything we can to get to you with the microphone. Caroline, could you come stand at the front so you can see people when they put up their hand? Thanks. The future of the Paris Agreement. Does it have a future, Jonathan?
Yeah, I think so. I must maybe start by saying that there is a possibility of going out of the Paris Agreement. There's an explicit provision, Article 28, that allows countries to get out of the agreement. So that is something that can be invoked. But this the whole process connected with it takes about 4 years. So if Trump were to start that whole process, then he wouldn't have the benefit because it's only after his term. But personally, I don't think...
Unless he goes for a second term.
Yes, that things will change.
That's in the stars.
But I don't think that will happen, to be honest, because the Paris Agreement is not that strict. And Obama already submitted the national determined commitments, so that's the main obligation under the Paris Agreement. So states have to submit their own reduction targets. Obama already did that, and only in 5 years' time you have to renew those. So that's done. And now, of course, it's up to the U.S. internal policies to try to achieve those, and I think those policies, may talk about it later, but I don't think those will be very effective, at least at a federal level under Trump. But who cares? This is something for the next president, I think. So I don't think that he will bother to enter this whole debate on the Paris Agreement.
So you're saying it's legally not possible?
It is legally possible. But I don't think it's politically not relevant for him, I think.
Politically, Marcel?
Yeah, well, I think that is where the nuance is. And looking at how Paris got negotiated and how it came together, the United States played a very positive role there. They were really the leaders of getting to the agreement. And that was the leadership that is also needed for the phase that comes next. And the years to come, there's a technical part of that. We are still negotiating the rule book, and we have to make concrete actions that get into those national plans. But there's still leadership needed to get into that action, because those are really two paths, and that came clear in Marrakesh, the next COP after Paris, where we were still having that technical path, but the beginnings of the action agenda came out, and up to that moment, we benefited a lot from the leadership that the United States took. And now we really have to find a new balance, literally, of power and see who else steps up to the front and keeps the coalition together.
Damien, your first impression of the future of the Paris Agreement?
I think it will certainly go forward. It isn't as if before the Paris Agreement was agreed, there was the potential for interested developing countries, the US, to have a standoff, but now we have an agreement. Europe brought it into force last year, and this agreement, as you said, I was last here in The Hague in 2000, just when the US elections had happened. Kyoto itself was in threat. The world came together. Kyoto came into force. What we had in Paris is a very different type of agreement. Europe said what it will do, a 40% reduction in greenhouse gases. The US has said what it will do. China said what it will do. India said what it will do. I think what's crucial is whether those countries put their policies in place to actually do that. I think if we talk later about the US domestic policy, there will be challenges for US domestic reductions, certainly in terms of the federal actions. But Europe, India, China, all of us have indicated that we're going to keep on to the grindstone, keep on putting the policies in place that have to be there, and I think that won't be turning back.
Well, I'm not on the panel, but can I have an opinion too? Well, no, let me just throw a monkey wrench in the works. Legally, okay. Politically, okay. How about the implementation, though, when everything from above says, don't do it, don't spend money on this, don't make it a political priority?
I can't see that, because I mean Paris is about national action. It's about working together, and outside of the Anglosphere, if I can call it that, I mean you don't have the tendency to climate denial. If you go to China, particularly when you see the air pollution as well, if you go to India, you see the interest in doing this, And the ambassador spoke about money making, and the interest in terms of the future must be there, because General Electric and others are going to lose out on the opportunities. You take electric cars as an example, the Chinese movement into this area, and people won't be wanting cars from Detroit. You see the development of the Chevy Bolt and others. Will they have the markets in the US? Possibly through city action, through state action, but at the global level, I think the US can lose a lot by not taking part in the changes that the rest of the world recognizes have to happen. Mm-hmm. And my big worry here is that we're not fast enough. I mean, on climate generally, we're not fast enough, and the US at a national level may drop back for a few years. But those changes still have to take place, and the science is pretty undeniable if you're interested in facts rather than alternative facts.
Well, there you have it.
There you go.
Yeah.
Ruth, just minutes after the inauguration, the whole word climate and climate change disappeared from the site of the White House. What does this tell us about the intention on the part of American government to make the Paris Agreement happen?
Okay, so clearly it feeds to our fears that the climate deniers are now at the helm in the White House and in the agencies. Two things about it. This is a political moment where when a government comes in, is there a problem here? Okay. So this happens when one government comes in, that the political appointees, I guess I have to do it this way, so since you're talking this direction, I'm talking to you. That there's a freeze on the hiring. I think I've done this before, but it looked like an amateur. A little bit better, good, yeah. So definitely there's a freeze, and there's a kind of everything goes black. But that is in part because a Trump team has been so unprepared. So where the transition team with Bush and Obama was much better in place, the Trump people are not in place. So we should not panic in that sense. At the same time, it is absolutely clear from everything we know what Trump, not only Trump says, but the people behind Trump and the Republican Congress, that climate change is not something that is something they want to deal with. I mean, that is very clear. What does that mean for the Paris Agreement? I think the panel members have already said it. What I find interesting right now is that Tillerson, who's Tillerson? And we know all he's an Exxon man. And what is interesting about the oil companies is that they have been, in a way, on board with the energy transition. So, and I actually spoke with people from Shell last week, and I asked them, are you gonna get out of all these agreements? And said, no, we're here for the long run. So that is interesting to me also that Tillerson said, we want to have a seat at the table. Now, rather than, that's what he said in the hearings, what that means for the process. It might be having a seat at the table and frustrate the process, or it might be to keep China in check. It might mean a whole list of things we don't know. But that would be my first reading.
We have our first question already, and from the same guy who had the first question last time.
Let's see. Yes, now my name is Felix Woldenberg. I personally have pretty much breathed, if you call it properly, tear gas in Paris during the ongoing negotiations. I've pretty much squatted coal mines in Germany, so I'm quite a bit of a rebel rouser on those parts. However, if you talk about right now with Trump as well as climate activists, you're talking about a harsh punishment on anyone that devises to intertwine or make sure that any programs or drillings are not going to get through. I mean, water is life, no DAPL, all those actions. What is the main issue at that point if you are not going to have an activist base any longer? You can do pretty much everything you want. So how can you, if you're talking about the Paris Agreement, because from my personal perception it's a failure, it's not harsh enough, But if you want to have any checks and balances to keep it at a minimal level, you need primarily non-governmental actors. You need non-governmental actors to keep it going. So how can
But
you...
what makes you think that there will not be an even stronger activist base given the circumstances now?
Yeah, no, pretty much on that part, the medicine is worse than the ailment. At least I don't hope so. But that could be the case. I mean, if you are, as a person, willing to go through those lengths, you are pretty much taking a hefty toll for yourself. And with Trump in office, that's going to be only higher and higher. So the question is if they are pretty much vigorous enough and resilient enough to keep going, or that it's going to be an ongoing warfare at that point in those occupations that you have pretty much violent. I mean, literally you have Martin Luther King and you have Malcolm X. And
What's
the question is...
Felix?
Primarily on that part, how you see activists and non-governmental organizations in their role during the Trump administration, primarily on the Paris Agreement.
Even busier. Oh, sorry.
Well, I mean, can I say something about because this is all about scale. So I find it interesting that Hans Binnendijk was talking about the leverage of power in a kind of traditional sense of the Congress and the press and so forth. But here we're talking about a global scale, and that's what we're talking about. The NGOs is a global phenomenon. The people who are behind the Paris Agreement, all the technocrats, I'm not saying this in a derogatory way, but the people who believe in the rule of law, who believe in rules, who believe in process, all these things that Trump does not believe in, they will be, together with the people on the streets, will have a voice.
Bien étonné de se trouver ensemble.
Peut-être. But so it is important to understand how power works on these different levels. And just because there's someone in the White House does not mean that everything stops on all these different levels. Having said that, what makes Trump very different, I think, from a Bush, because in so many ways he looks like Bush in terms of concrete policy, is that his words are disruptive. And so as a community and as watchers and as people who believe in the democratic process, I think that that is the most important, the puzzle for all of us. How do we deal with he's saying one thing and then does another, or he's contradictory, or all the mixed messages, the violence of his language, the discourse. And discourse really matters. I do not have an answer to it, but I want to put that on the table as part of what we're dealing with here.
The reason I started talking about implementation just now was because one of the things that really worries me is that Trump rules by fear. I read this morning on Twitter that Trump had called the head of the national parks because someone who works at the national parks had retweeted something about the number of people who attended the inauguration. And I thought, this is how insidious it works. It's just by making people afraid. Our institutions, like a huge international achievement, Damien, as you mentioned, the Paris Agreement, can we cope with this insidious worm in our midst of fear?
I don't think it's helpful to have this shadow cast across things. I mean, I would defend Paris. It's clearly not enough, but the goals in it to limit climate change to 2 degrees, 1.5 degrees, which I think is very, very challenging. We're not on track for that. These goals are there. Trump can't get away from them. What's scary is that countries like India, if the US says, we don't care, nor should you, this may influence Modi to do less. And
Me Too behavior. Well, Modi's coming to talk to Trump soon, so...
Yeah, I mean, this is my biggest worry. I mean, the German Environment Minister yesterday said she thinks that Trump will bring the rest of the world together. And I think on the challenge of climate change, we have to do that. We have to change these policies. It's turning a supertanker around. And again, what worries me most is wasting 4 more or 8 more years with the country that has the most soft power in the world saying this isn't a problem, because it very clearly is.
If I may just add briefly to that, the interesting thing that happened in Paris is that this whole question of climate change moved from let's say the diplomatic circles or the political table to the real economy, and that is happening at the moment. So you saw right after the election of Trump You saw a letter signed by, I think, over 300 American CEOs who said, no matter what you say, we continue on this path towards a circular economy or towards a carbon neutral society, because it's a smart thing to do. It's wise to invest in renewables, and at the moment you see more jobs, new jobs coming into solar energy, the green jobs, than they are in fossil energy. And you see investors looking ahead, not for 4 years, but for 10 or 15 years, saying we're going to invest in renewable energy, not in fossil energy anymore, perhaps maybe from some pockets in the United States. And that is something that will not put the Paris Agreement off track. It may delay it a little bit, but many people believe this is the way to go. And that is, I think, the hopeful sign that we have.
And if that's where the new jobs are, that's where the attention will go. I know that I think 270 American architecture firms also sent an open letter to Trump saying, hey, this is a business opportunity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We will get to you in just one moment, but I'm going to Mr. Hirschberlin first.
Thank you. Well, just one remark related to Jonathan Verschuren's, my close colleague at Tilburg University, remarks about the Paris Agreement and the withdrawal. I think that you said it about fear, you said it about the side effects of a different policy. Words matter. And one of the things that we've seen in the Netherlands since 2010, the short-lived cooperation with the Populist Party and our government, is that the acceptability of language in politics has changed. That's one of the things that I think that we should be concerned about now that it has been rendered acceptable to be a climate skeptic and at the helm of the most important country in the world. That could change the political discourse and the intensity of efforts of other people related to climate. And when words count, it could be even attractive for a Trump government, a Trump administration, to withdraw from the Paris Agreement. I hope they won't do that, but I'm not as sure as Jonathan that they won't do that because it doesn't make much difference. Sometimes it makes a difference how you present yourself in international relations. And if that happens, the side effects could be much larger than just the limited legal effects.
So actually, Mr. Hirschberlin, it's a boon that all communication now is limited to 140 characters of a tweet. Sir.
Thank you. My name is Khalid Ahmed Chaudhry from International Human Rights Commission. According to different environmental groups, victory of Mr. Donald Trump is a disaster for the planet. And my question is, we have a president in the White House now who doesn't care about the climate change or the cities what you mentioned. So how big are the chances that his administration would try to cancel the Paris Agreement or to influence, to reshape, renegotiate this agreement? Thank you.
I think we addressed the legal and political implications. Are you from the subcontinent yourself?
I'm from South Asia.
From South Asia. And could you go back with the microphone, Caroline? I'm curious what you expect of the meeting between Trump and Modi with regards to the Paris Agreement.
Okay, I'm from Pakistan.
I thought so.
So now the answer is already there. You know, I'm extremely worried about the role of Donald Trump in South Asia, specifically when two nuclear powers are standing face to face, India and Pakistan. China is there. We have a CPEC. It is called China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, a huge project which is going on road infrastructure from China to Pakistan and then to the sea, where USA is extremely worried about that as well. So I personally believe what I can see that Mr. Donald Trump would add more oil on the fire. And this is going to happen, so because he would like to bring China into this situation, And that will be some kind of situation that we will have more polarizing South Asia. So many more countries will join. Not only India and Pakistan, we can see that he will try his level best to support and strengthen Iran against Saudi Arabia and other countries as well. Thank you.
Modi is an avid Twitterer as well. Maybe they'll talk about Twitter. I am very curious to hear from Marcel. You mentioned, I think it was you who mentioned the effects on the negotiations in Morocco for the next climate agreement. Was that you?
Yeah.
Yeah. What, will there be an effect?
There will definitely be an effect because, and that goes back into several of the last remarks. Language does matter when you're at a negotiations table. First of all, you, as a diplomat, you look at the balance of power. Who is sitting there? Who is bringing what power to the table? But secondly, you start to assess what language the other speaks, or what language the other gets triggered by. And clearly we have someone at the table now who speaks a complete different language. And that is something that we have to assess now and have to take into account. And maybe that has an effect on the language that we start to speak. And it could very well be the business language that we have to bring to the table, because that may be something that the new American president understands. Just give you an example, and I was not in Marrakesh, because in Marrakesh took place when the American elections took place as well. So we're still having the Obama administration at the table. But later on, there was a meeting of the G20 in December, and the Netherlands has been invited to sit at that table for this year during the German presidency. And you could see a tilting of the balance of power at the table already, because the United States became a bit more quiet than we were used to from them. Others were stepping up to the plate. And
which others?
Well, some of the skeptics, and that is what was referred to as well here. So Saudi Arabia, who is definitely having another interest in this whole debate. And they became a bit more vocal, as was Russia, interestingly enough. So that is interesting to see that balance is changing, and I think some of the others refer to that as well. We will have to see and wait and see what that really is going to mean in the future of the Paris Agreement. And I very much agree with Jonathan that it's written and signed, and it's actually in effect now. So that won't change as much as we may fear. But
formally.
Formally, exactly. And that is what I think Damien referred to as well. It's the moral leadership and what will actually happen in practice, and who will be emboldened to start action on that path towards 2 degrees. And if we add up all the national plans right now, we are on a path to 2.7. And I think that it was the Washington Post who calculated what the election of Trump might mean for that path to 2.7, and they came to the conclusion it doesn't matter much when you look on paper, because all the real action is only starting at 2020, 2022, etc. But it's if he with his rhetorics encourages others to become skeptic as well and lower down or water down their plans, that's where the real damage might occur.
If that damage does occur, let's take the worst case scenario and think that this might indeed happen. Will Europe step up to the plate? Will we increase our climate change efforts? Will there be commercial sanctions? Will we try even harder, as Ambassador Schuwer mentioned, to sell ourselves, to sell our expertise on climate change to the US? What will Europe do if this happens? Jonathan, any theories on that?
It's hard to say. Europe won't step up, I think, their policy, because it's already on a very high level.
Struggling to meet our own goals, huh?
So I think that maybe Europe will even be more on heading the rest of the world in showing where we should go to, what kind of policy instruments we should use, and those kind of things. But personally, I'm not sure if this is really going to happen, because what we are forgetting is that for a very long time, the US didn't have a very ambitious climate policy at all. But from 1997 to 2013, there was nothing at all. And But a lot did happen, all on state level.
Yeah,
There are
climate change.
34, no, but climate action also. 34 states have action plans. The whole shale gas revolution, of course, was driven by business, but actually was a really good thing from climate change perspective, because coal-fired power plants switched to natural gas, which is much, much cleaner. The Obama administration did put things in place that cannot be revoked anymore. The whole the car fuel standards, they're already in place, and car producers are already producing those cars with those new standards. With a 50% reduction of CO2 from cars. So I'm not that negative again. I think a lot of things have already been set in motion, cannot be turned back, and also won't be turned back because they're all good for the American economy and for jobs. And are also.
But the president hasn't figured that out
No,
yet.
no, that's not true, because the president, there was one, at one of these rallies, a woman who said, my husband works at this plant that produces wind energy installations. He said, I will support those jobs. I will create more of those kind of jobs. So it's all about jobs. That's his interest. He's not interested in climate change. He's interested in creating jobs. And if it's through coal and oil, that's fine with him as well. So we will see more in coal production and exploitation. You've already seen the oil pipeline that's been kind of signed off. So that will happen. But personally, I think that those coals will be for the export market and not for the US market, because there will be no new coal-fired power plants anymore in the United States.
I was interested to hear you mention Chevy, Ruth, because that was one of the few optimistic things I read about this, that it was said that so many car dealers, car manufacturers, have now changed their production process to meet these new standards, which started in California, but have spread all over the U.S., that it would be a huge bleeder to change that production process back to what it used to be. So, like it or not, we're already on that path.
Oh, well, that's true. I mean, in the same way that I mentioned that Shell, has a long-term perspective. This is true for many businesses, and we should be reminded that under the Bush administration, in his final years, it was actually corporate America that was ahead of the federal government. So that is really one important player on the global scale. Impacting the U.S. And the second one is, of course, the states. Not only California, obviously, but also Maryland, Rhode Island, Illinois have their own energy transition plans, but also there are other standards like building and so forth. So that is something that Trump is not going to touch. In the same way, I think your column,
the new normal.
And I think your column about the hope or the belief and also the reality of cities being a major factor. We, as historians, we say the 20th century was really the century of the nation state, and the 21st century is really the century of the city and the transnational. And so you can interpret also the rhetoric of a Putin or of Trump as maybe the last gasp of the 20th century. That might be one way. I don't know, but
it's a good title for a book.
Yeah. That's one way of looking at it. Definitely cities are extremely important. The only thing they really do not have any say in is, of course, in waging wars. That is still what a president can initiate and a U.S. President can also end them. But that's a kind of power that cities really do not have.
Although we all know that initiating is always a lot easier than ending.
Absolutely. But I think, that's putting a positive, slice it positively. I think that as a scholar, what worries me greatly, and this is also, Trump is not the cause, but is an expression of that, is the disbelief in facts and science. Mm-hmm. And this has a direct impact not only on climate science, but also the way the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, how it will be doing its work. And in some ways, the laws that Trump cannot touch, they will be carried out, but the EPA has to base it on science in the way it does its work. And there are clear indications that on that level, the administration is going after scientists very specifically. And that can have a really eroding effect.
Just this week, Trump announced that the EPA is no longer allowed to publish its reports independently. They have to be vetted first by government. Well, that's that. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, hello, thank you. My name is Anna Marhold. I'm an assistant professor at Tilburg University. I work on international trade policy, and I wrote my PhD on international trade and energy regulation, looking at OPEC, etc. So I have a bit of a different question as a European, because I do feel like a European, first of all. I think we're talking about Europe, how we should, can we have a strong stance in this? But what is we and what is Europe? I think we're really in a crisis at the moment. I think the US, the Dutch ambassador to the Netherlands says we, and then we also say we. So what is Dutch? What is European? We think now about how the EU will deal with the Paris Agreement, with the Brexit. This is a big question. How will we meet our plans now, and what's going to happen there? And I would love
to the panel is?
I would love to ask the UK nationality European Commission fellow what your views on this are. Yes. So if you could give me some views, I'd be very grateful, because I think this is now is the time to act. What do we want to be as Europe? Thank you.
Yeah, I think this is another issue parallel to our discussion. I mean, the Netherlands has huge amounts to offer the world on cities, on urban development, and I really hope it does. For Europe as a whole, as a body, what can we do? I mean, we've been not just doing the American market-based approach to climate protection for over a decade. So this is the kind of policy that Exxon approves of, using the market as well as Shell and others.
This gentleman here on the, yes.
But Europe, we've been working with over 5 years with China on their developing national carbon pricing as well. So Europe is great at that level of working with other large countries to get in rational policy. I was yesterday in council with the 28 member states, and we're moving forward with a framework our heads of state decided on 2 years ago. I mean, Europe's slow, but we're methodical, and this legislation should be agreed by the end of 2017.
I'm completely comforted, thank you.
No, I mean, I think Trump's shaken people out of complacency, and on climate change there isn't that reason for complacency, looking for silver linings. But the UK, one of the ironies is the UK was one of the countries always pushing for market-based policies to address climate change. Margaret Thatcher was there recognising the science. And one of the issues with Brexit, of course, is the UK wanted the EU emissions trading system, the price on carbon. And we're there working with China, we're there working with Canada, who are very much moving down this route fast. And you obviously have a lot more weight as Europe than as a single country there. So this is where Europe, I think, can really add on climate policy. We've been following that path for many years, sort of well organised, I'd say, even last decade, to focus on business and getting business advantages and businesses on board.
He hasn't internalized the Brexit yet. Can you hear it?
But Brexit is not helpful in all this. It's a distraction from what we need to do on climate change.
Sir, please.
My name is Sheikh Mohammed Belal. I work with the Embassy of Bangladesh here. So thank you. We are really enjoying these very loaded discussions. As you know that in Bangladesh, for us, Paris Agreement was not simply an agreement. It was kind of a charter for our survival. So for us in Bangladesh, climate change is not an issue of debate or discussions. It's our reality. Sea is rising and coasts are sinking. By the way, thanks to the government of the Netherlands for all the help that you have been providing us to make our delta a little safer than what it is now.
Through the Netherlands Water Partnership, I believe.
Yes, yes, we are having excellent relations, and with their help we are trying to make a plan called Bangladesh Delta Plan 2100. So, but with all the knowledge and kind of expertise they have, I think it's not enough for us, because as you know, we're a country of 160 million people, only within a space which is smaller than the state of New York. So for us, challenge is just humongous. So with all the discussions of this skepticism after these US elections, and also from your discussions, what we, as a layman, what I could pick up, that's from now onwards, the climate change issue would be more on the market-based initiatives. But for a country, a least developed country like Bangladesh, what incentives do the businesses have to pay more attention to us than to others? So what kind of suggestions do you have for a country like Bangladesh? I would primarily like to have your reaction, Mr. Marcel, first, and others can join. Thank you.
Well, I think first of all...
What's in it for them in Bangladesh?
Well, I think you stated it very clearly. What's in it for you is that climate change is very much a reality that you have to deal with and that you actually have to adapt to, because otherwise there's no future for large parts of the country. So that is absolutely the first thing I think should be on your mind. Secondly, that also provides business opportunities.
But Marcel, that's what he said.
No,
that's what he said. It's a matter of survival.
It's a matter of survival.
Yeah. But what's in it for Western businesses to invest in a
I think those examples were given as well. Coastal works, water management, adaptation, waste management, all those things. And I think it's...
But why would these businesses invest in Bangladesh rather than in countries that are better able to pay the bills?
Businesses invest because they want to earn money. So that is...
But Bangladesh doesn't have that money, or am I misinterpreting you?
But that's true. Perhaps not enough, but it's there are many multilateral development banks, for example, that do want to invest. And for example, impact investors, there's billions of money out there just waiting to being invested. And of course, they do that in areas where the risk is low. So what many of
and there's usually some sort of return expected.
Yes, of course. So you have to see where the risk can be lowered, and that is, for example, what the World Bank is doing in Bangladesh, is buying off the highest risk, getting some risk insurance there, buying off equity so others can step in. But you're absolutely right. It's a difficult environment to step into. So that is, let us say, the economic side of your argument. The other one is that that notion of this is a really the harsh reality for many countries needs to get to the ears of the people that perhaps don't want to hear it at the moment. And I think through the alliances that countries like Bangladesh are in, that reality can be put to the table much more forcefully than is currently the case, because unfortunately the debates at the table, for example in the UNFCCC, is often tilting towards the economic side as well. So we're talking about loss and damage and who should pay for that and who not. Sometimes forgetting that why are we doing this, and that is difficult sometimes. And in the G77, for example, in the negotiations, sometimes good solutions are being blocked because it's stopped by that economic side of it, and that is something that I think we should talk about, and where the EU can play a role.
It's funny, isn't it, Marcel? On the one hand, we're selling climate measures as a business opportunity.
Yeah.
At the same time, the business opportunity side of it is what is stopping those measures.
Because
why don't the two of you have a beer after the conference? Something good might come of this. Yeah.
No, but I absolutely hear that argument.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Please.
So, my name is Lawrence, and I was wondering, how do you see the position of China and India in this? Because we see that America is basically leaving its role as sort of the moral high ground for climate policy. And what we also see is that China and India are stepping up to this role, with China cutting their coal plants, India actually having like a 60% target for 20-something. Do you think that China and India will take this more high ground and will actually get like more soft power from this, because this is a huge opportunity for them?
Please.
I'm not a China expert, but I have been dealing with China on urban level. I know something about, we have this idea that in China an environmental issue is something that's only very recent. That's not the case. Actually, this has a much longer history. It is also clear that, like in Bangladesh, they're facing the effects of the climate change every day. So the party leadership has a real commitment internally for very good reasons, for self-interested reasons, to move forward. At the same time, for example, when it comes to investing in cities, I think there's still the dilemma of they're very much vested to the auto industry, the car industry, and they have heavily invested in that. And the kind of impact that has on city is not something that has been fully addressed. So I think that China definitely is in the position to maybe step up and carry this forward, because I think that the commitment to sustainability is real. It's not just because it's fancy or whatever, and they're also very much interested in innovations in that sense. Whether they have the kind of soft power or moral leadership that you were talking about, I think that's a whole other ball game, but definitely the self-interest is there, I would say.
I'd like to finish off this panel with a final question to you, Ruud. You were the driving force behind this beautiful book. It's just beautiful to see. Cycling Cities, the European Experience in 2016. Cycling sounds like such a small, sort of incremental thing in this whole discussion about international agreements on climate change. Yet nevertheless, we've all seen the amazing and wonderful extent to which the Dutch have become leaders in the very hot field of urban cycling, of which your book, I think, is a manifestation. We have a cycling mayor who is moving to New York in April, and hopefully will spread the good word there. There are delegations coming to Amsterdam all the time. In Dutch cities, 2/3 of the trips, of the urban trips, are done by bike. In France, that's 2%. They have some catching up to do. You could perhaps see this as a sort of bottom-up movement, which in the long run may actually do more to influence our thinking and our behavior about climate than all the agreements in the world. Sorry, gentlemen.
Well, it's definitely the global cycling cities movement is a bottom up, but I must say that that's also how I got interested in this as a research issue. Bloomberg, if you look at how he framed his interest in cycling, he said it precisely as we were talking about. He said for the economic health of cities, it is important to have livable cities, and he saw cycling as a key to that. So I think that actually changed for a lot of people the way they understood cycling as part of a sustainable urban mobility in general. Other corporate players like Deco, you can have a lot of problems with them. What they did in Paris is also an example of that. So it's not just...
What did they do in Paris?
Well, it's a very complicated business deal. They were interested in outdoor publicity. Then there was a socialist mayor, and they threw in some bicycles as a kind of a way, as a goodwill, as a branding and so forth. But it has, there's a lot to say against it, but it has put cycling as a possibility for a sustainable urban mobility really at the foreground. And I do see that as something that, is totally outside the frame of mind of Donald Trump.
Donald Trump on a bicycle.
Obama. But no, this is important. This is important. Obama had a photo opportunity in 2008 as part of his election on a bicycle with a helmet. Now, clearly, this is not how Trump is going to be portrayed.
It mess up his hair.
Yes, it mess up his hair. But it does symbolize, as you were saying, that Obama was the first urban president. And in that sense, Trump, even though he's from New York, what he represents is really this nation-state, suburban, and middle American alliance, which is something that we see throughout this 20th century. But in political terms, I think that's not the future.
When you get on your bike in the morning, do you feel like you're part of a worldwide movement?
When when I put my my scholarly hat on, yes. When I just go somewhere, no, I'm just enjoying the ride.
Yeah. We can make a difference. Well, thank you to our panel members. Thank you to the audience. Before I introduce you to our next panel, I would like to add an idea that was offered to us by a member of the audience of the last panel. He said, "Oh no, he's here. Why don't you tell us yourselves?" You had a good idea.
Yeah, a quite simple idea. All people talk about China, east of Europe, all the big stuff. It's also relevant. The point is following. I would not put Trump himself on the bike. I would put his daughter on the bike and sell it like Trump news. And because he likes a family, she's a direct influence. And what he sells, if Trump is just in the magazine. You saw his cabinet, so his table. Everywhere photos about himself and the family. So I will put my money on Ivanka.
So Ivanka on a Trump bike.
That would be the next idea.
We have Boris bikes, so why not Trump bikes? Yes. Say what?
With a pussy hat.
God.
A pink pussy hat.
Does everyone know what pussy hats are? Yes. Yeah, everyone? I had one on Tuesday on my talk show.
If I may say, the best would be to ask suggestion from Meryl Streep and Robert De Niro.
Lots of good ideas here. So, on our third and last panel of this afternoon, before we hear the keynote of Jaap de Hoop Scheffer, which we're all very much looking forward to, glad you're here, we are going to talk about the future of American trade policy. TTIP, TPP, NAFTA, all these acronyms that nobody can ever quite remember what they stand for, but which I think are very important for the future of our global economy. And we have with us, I'll introduce you to our panel members. Our first is Maria Bartel, who is an assistant professor at the University of Amsterdam. And you are originally Czech-Croatian, am I correctly informed?
Croatian, but with a lot of travel in the meanwhile. So also somewhat Czech. I have many identities.
A world citizen.
World citizen,
yes.
Yeah.
You are currently researching the critique of institutional design, the functional institutional design of post-nation. Maria, tell us yourself. I can't figure this out.
I research post-national markets, such as TTIP or other kinds of.
And you're also a bit of a rebel, I heard.
I think this is the reason why I'm here.
I'm glad you're here. We also have a real American with us.
Oh, thank you.
Jim Mathis. Jim
Dutch
is an
American.
Dutch American, like me, yeah.
Mhm.
An associate professor in international trade law, also at the University of Amsterdam. His research interests include international trade law and the World Trade Organization, regional trade agreements in the WTO, transatlantic trade issues, technical barriers to trade, we'll be certainly talking about that today, and regional and international competition policies. And you are also the managing editor of the magazine Legal Issues of Economic Integration.
Thank you.
And next to me, Frank Hofmeister. Frank is the head of unit at the Directorate General of Trade in the European Commission and also a professor at the Vrije Universiteit, the Free University of Brussels. Your unit is implementing the EU's trade defense policy. You're the former deputy head of cabinet in Commissioner de Gucht's cabinet, international trade. And he was formerly a member of the external relations and the institutional team at the European Commission's legal service. Well, I'm really curious to hear you on all the legal implications of what's going on now. Let me start by posing all three of you the same question. Is Trump's election a backlash against international trade, a justified backlash? Is this something that threatens equality and democracy? Maria, I'll bet you have an outspoken opinion on that.
Well, I think that there are certain reasons which point to the direction that trade has had quite a few negative impacts. I think trade law people talk about this in terms of trade diversion and possible social and labor dislocations which come thanks to, for example, shifts of production from one place to another, from from rural to urban areas, etc. So there have been certain dislocations, and then many of the critics have claimed that we have not taken sufficient care to compensate those who have lost in the trade integration, in the globalization, for those possibly negative effects. And now those are kind of striking back. So there is something justified there, but the Trump's version of the strike back is a good one. I would doubt that. But yeah, so there is some real material harm which has occurred on the side of some people, which may give or has given rise to some anger.
Frank Hofmeister, your opinion, justified backlash? Is there a wrong that needs to be redressed?
I acknowledge the previous point that in a trade deal, there may be people who feel they are losing out because they face increased competition.
Wait a minute, who feel they're losing out or who are losing out?
I say who feel that they are losing out. Whether they are losing out because of the trade deal remains then to be seen, because there are many factors, may well be, that they are working in an industry which anyway is not on the top of innovation, which has structural deficiencies, where there's bad management. There are many reasons. And on top of it, it may well be that an increased competition from foreign products, which come in at a cheaper and a more efficient way, adds to that. That's the causalities are never clear, but it's very clear that people feel that it's because of the trade deal that they are losing out. On the other hand, and that is what Mr. Trump doesn't say, there are of course a lot of jobs which are created because of trade deals, because they support the American export jobs. And that is pretty clear if you see the effects of NAFTA, for example. The American agriculture exports grew immensely. And I was in Washington in the week when the elections were done, and the US chief negotiator of NAFTA on the agricultural said that the president-elect probably doesn't know that. How many jobs have actually been created for American agriculture business? So you have to look at it. It's
at
not
the cost
just
of Mexican agriculture business,
yes,
but okay.
Yeah, true. But there are both sides. So there are maybe industrial jobs where there's an increased competition and they are losing out. At the same time, there is an addition to export-led growth, which he doesn't have in the picture and which he doesn't wish probably now to look at. But so there is some reason to be attentive to the issues. But from the EU perspective, we are pretty much convinced that liberalization of trade in the past has an overall positive effect. It has led to growth overall and increased jobs, while there may have been shifts between sectors.
You should see the face of your neighbor.
Yeah, well.
Jim, justified backlash?
You know, without being, I'm not an economist, but this has been coming a long time. And one can fairly easily say that the quality of debate over trade in the United States is quite horrific. It's a very low quality debate, and it's not often that people have a balanced exchange of facts about trade or adjustments. But the United States has been doing...
But what's bad about the debate, Jim? That people don't want to know the facts, or that they're not provided with the facts? Or they're provided with alternative facts?
It's a simplistic discussion. And it doesn't matter whether you're on the far left or the far right. It's just, it's a very simple zero-sum game discussion. That guy lost his job. Bang. Look what trade did to him. Bang. I was out in the Northwest with a lot of Bernie Sanders supporters, a lot of my family members, all of them opposed to TPP, all of them opposed to international trade agreements, and they're all living in the Northwest, which is the largest technology export economy in the world. Boeing, Microsoft, Nike. It's unbelievable, and they're all working for these companies. And none of them would have these jobs if it wasn't for international trade. These companies wouldn't even exist in these states, Microsoft. So you just have this complete disconnect going on inside the country. But, and I just close this.
So this anti-trade mentality actually dates from long before Trump.
It does, except it's hard to predate Trump on this because Trump, unlike a lot of the other things where he's endlessly unpredictable, and everyone says, oh, the only thing predictable about him is he's unpredictable. The one thing that has been predictable about him is he's been an economic nationalist since the 1980s. He goes back to Pat Buchanan's style of close this country and I'm an economic nationalist. America goes first. Zero-sum game. Trade deficit bad, trade surplus good.
But there
That's
isn't
the
going to be a
change.
trade surplus with this 20% import tariffs that he announced yesterday.
Well, he's going to grab his trade surplus from Mexico. We have a deficit with Mexico. He's going to go after that country. To me, here's the difference. And I hope Frank appreciates this. Every country that has qualitative administrative capacity does a serious job of taking care of their trade defense. These are the rules that allow us to exercise defense. Anti-dumping, countervailing duties, anti-subsidy actions. This is okay under our rules. All of Trump's instruments are unilateral protectionist measures. They're not trade defensive measures. And to some range or another, across the degree, they're all WTO unlawful. The only unpredictability about Donald Trump is which one of the unpredictable unilateral instruments are they going to choose to use and when? That's where I think this discussion is actually at. And are they going to start with the most offensive ones that are the easiest WTO violations to prove? Or are they going to try to do something a bit more subtle?
Can you
And
give
have
me an
maybe a
example
little
of one
bit
of
more
these
discussion?
one of these blatant ones?
Pardon?
Can you give me an example of one of these blatant ones?
We can actually put them in order. A single country unilateral tariff based on the origin of the country. I want to raise tariffs on Chinese products 35% or on Mexican products to 25%. That's a no-brainer WTO case for most favored nation. We have rules of non-discrimination. You can't pick on another country in the international trading system. That's the system that we designed. It's a system that the EU and the United States have held up, basically helped put together.
And
they're
is that
walking
system-
they're challenging that directly in its face with that kind of a rule.
Is that system Trump-proof? Is that system well enough defended on a legal basis? Maybe this is a question more for Frank,
pass
to
that
be
one to
able
Frank or
to prevent this kind of anti-cherry picking, shall I say?
Well, he can do it as a matter of U.S. Constitutional law. If he puts in a punitive tariff, let's say, on imports from Mexico, saying, I want to discourage that people import to the U.S. Via the back door, he can do it. And even the checks and balances in the U.S. are weak, because you don't need Congress for that. Congress, long time ago, has authorized presidents to do such kind of tariffs. And interestingly, a Republican senator has, on the day of his inauguration, introduced a bill, said, we want to revoke that authorization for the president, because he fears that he is going to abuse it. Yeah, Mr. Lee, Tea Party member. But okay, so as a matter of
his days are counted, let me tell you.
Maybe, but as a matter of U.S. law, he can do it. Okay, but as Jim has said, then we would look at the international obligations of the U.S. and they have said, most favored nation, we are going to give everybody the same tariff unless we are in a preferential kind of arrangement. Then we can give them preferences, but we cannot punish them. So it's an obvious violation of Article 1 of the GATT. And then he probably doesn't have any good justification, such as environmental or other things. So there's a violation. Your question is now, how can we enforce it? And the European Union in the past has been rather adamant about it. we have had cases against the United States before the WTO dispute settlement body. And that is important. That is compulsory jurisdiction. So the US cannot avoid that they would be brought before a panel and the appellate body. And they could, in theory, also say this was wrong, that was WTO inconsistent. And if the EU, in such example, or Mexico...
And then what's the sanction?
The sanction is that the winner can get an authorization for retaliation. And that is actually what policymakers really have as a threat. We don't want it, because retaliation means escalation, trade war, and what have you, but it is a threat, and in some cases it is needed. One example... when
has this ever actually happened, Frank?
Absolutely. We have won a case against President Bush, Steele. He had put in place a multilateral safeguard, obviously illegal. We won the case, and after some domestic, let's say, pushing and so on, they actually abolished it because they knew there's high retaliation coming. And also on subsidies, and I want to be complimenting that, there are ideas to say, well, on taxes, we are going to punish those who are importing, and we allow exports to deduct from their own taxes. Yeah, so that's an export subsidy. And in the past, the US has been, before the WTO, the Foreign Sales Corporation case. The EU challenged the US legislation on export subsidies through taxes, and we won $1 billion. And the US also, after a long time, implemented. So I would just say, in the trade field, there are some international checks and balances which could play out. And that's a big difference to panel number 1, War and Peace, because with all due respect, the International Court of Justice is there, yes, but the US does not submit to its jurisdiction.
Right.
You cannot bring a case against the US before The Hague. In the WTO, we can. And that is something which makes trade a bit more robust.
Is it a question to you, Maria? Is it possible in the drafting of one of these large international treaties to address beforehand the injustice that often is a spin-off of the treaties themselves? If we recognize that this exists, can we prevent it beforehand?
Well, so it really depends on the content of the treaty. So I think that so the critiques of all those agreements have been very much on, for instance, regulatory cooperation. So the kind of rules that we as Europe will be able to put in place to enforce our own environmental standards. So one of the major, so to link it to the second panel, some of those treaties are actually problematic from not only from social justice point of view, so what kind of diversion of trade within the EU or with Africa, for instance, the increased cooperation with the EU, US can have, but also with regard to what kind of rules we can put in place in Europe. So, for instance, so how far we can go with rules protecting environment. And in some ways, if we see that Trump is actually going very much anti-environment, the fact that we do not have TTIP with such a American administration is a hugely advantageous fact, because we could see the TTIP and the institutions that were supposed to emerge within this framework be very easily abused to pressure or place a large pressure on the EU to not go forward with some of its environmental regulations, for instance. I'm sure that our trade colleague will not agree with it, but that has been the fear, and that the major critique coming from the EU was very much about the space or the possibilities for the EU to enact many of the environmental regulations.
Social justice and environmental sides. Yeah. Isn't it a bizarre situation now, Maria, that there's been a lot of critique of TTIP here in Europe, and that now they find Donald Trump on their side?
Well, figure. Well, yeah. So, so in a way, everything bad is, this is Croatian saying, everything bad can be good for something. So
it sounds like a pronouncement by Johan Cruijff.
So I think
elk nadeel heeft zijn voordeel.
I think it's very important to see Trump a little bit as a call to international community and international trade community to a little bit start thinking about the way we are construing global trade, that may want to think more in an integrated manner, for instance, about climate, about migration also. So, and that is something that we have seen already the first steps there. For example, foreign direct investment and its impact in Africa on migration. So there are many fields which have been so far very much outside of trade field, but which need to become much more integrated in our thinking about international economic order. If we want to, use Trump as a good kick to
a catalyst for good.
A catalyst for good, or a catalyst of actually starting rethinking international economic order, which.
If I may.
Okay, and then we'll go to you.
Yeah. I cannot agree with
Felix,
this.
are you?
Of course.
Felix?
Yeah.
I'm waiting for you.
No,
I'm waiting for you to.
If you have any question, I will put those questions in detail as climate because we're quite happy with what happens, of course, on that matter because we've got a steep time.
No. You'll get the microphone in a minute if you want it. If you do.
Yeah.
Yes, please, Frank.
I would like to back a different view. There is nothing good if a left-wing or right-wing protectionist has the same view about free trade. It's basically the idea that we need to protect our own people because they are losing out by giving preferences, by closing up our markets and so on. You punish at the same time your own consumers, you get de-linked from international innovation and progress, and let's not forget, it was free trade which lifted a number of poor countries in Asia in a rather dramatic speed out of poverty. So on that one, I really beg to differ and say I see nothing good in it. It is a slash on an important pillar of what has brought growth and development in the last 20 years. And therefore, what really happens is that in Europe, the right-wing protectionists, they will bank on it. Just hear Marine Le Pen. It's not America first, it's France d'abord.
Sure.
I'm going to give jobs to French people. And that will be illegal in the European Union. We have a principle of non-discrimination all around and so on. So I really would like to say this is very dangerous and I cannot see anything good about it. I only see the negative score.
Okay.
I'd like to follow up
Back to you in a moment, but
just very briefly with him, from Frank. I think I can follow on that in saying that for America to adopt visibly protectionist instruments, whether it be a country tax like we talked about earlier, or an offshore tax, taxing firms that build products in Mexico instead of the United States, like he threatened on BMW last week, or the border tax adjustment idea, which is basically a subsidy.
Yeah.
And Toyota.
Either way, or Toyota, either way you look at this, the United States has never adopted a series of policies that is blatantly protectionist. We've done some quiet protectionism, but to put it right out there and say, America first, you're all screwed. Appreciate that we've never been in a large trade war with the largest market on this planet for 70 years. You got to go back to the 1930s to even get anything like this. So the size of the change, the dimension of what we're going through on the trade side is a big one. And my feeling about that, especially for my EU friends, is it's time for us to seriously get our act together. Not as a matter of retaliation, not as a matter of evil, as a matter of global leadership in the trading system. Right now, the WTO...
And who is we, Jim? The EU?
The WTO, 160 members. We need the EU to operate as a real leader in the multilateral trading system. The EU is the only other big player on this planet. China is a small market compared to the EU. And the EU has to step into the role.
Doing what?
One thing, spot off, is clean up all of this tentative stuff about whether we're going to have a functional common commercial policy and whether we're going to have a referendum on a Ukrainian agreement or a Valonian parliament passing the trade agreement. The Lisbon Treaty grants the power to pass a trade agreement, common commercial policy, to the European Parliament. We've got our democratic legitimacy already lined up in the treaty. Start using it, and I hope the Commission starts defending the common commercial policy. That's where I want to go.
Statement.
I think this is very dangerous in a way. So it's not accidental that we see the similar demographics when it comes to Brexit and when it comes to Trump. So there are groups which have not participated, let's say, at the futures, whatever you want to, however you want to call it, knowledge, globally integrated knowledge society. There are certain groups who cannot participate in those futures, and if we keep ignoring them by saying we all profit from common, yeah, we all profit, but the profits are distributed in a different way. And it's very problematic to actually not recognize that fact and not take it seriously. So, and we actually may see an increasing number of angry people who are not sitting here. Those people do not participate in these kind of events. They are not part of our world.
They're outside demonstrating.
Well, they are not even demonstrating. Those who are voting for Trump, they are not demonstrating. Those that are demonstrating, they are still sitting on the table. So they are part of the future's, global knowledge integrated economy. But if we do not take seriously those that are losing, in a way, we may have a serious problem. And we are already on a very, very, very bad track to right-wing mobilization because right-wing actually can use the fear of those people. These people are insecure.
I see you. You've been very patient.
Yes.
Thank you.
Fascinating. I really enjoyed what you all have been saying. I'd love to hear from Jim and Maria. So the danger is black and white thinking, right? So TTIP is bad. It very quickly gets polarized. How can we enhance the quality of the debate to make people understand that there are some really decent economic rationales for these agreements, and that there's also parts that do need scrutiny, that do need criticism? How would you enhance the debate on these issues, both in the US and in the EU? Thank you.
So, do we start?
Yes, please. Caroline? Yes, please. Go ahead.
Well, I think that, I'm also not for black-white solutions, so we are scholars, and we scholars like nuance, so there is much to be said for international cooperation and international economic
I'm doing my
cooperation.
best to get away from the nuance in this discussion.
But we like it. It's difficult to give up. It protects us. But I think that I think that taking each other seriously is one way how to go. So, for instance, if you look, and I have to get a little bit to kind of pump up the discussion, a little bit personal, or a little bit more specific, for instance, at a certain position of the commission that the Commission has taken vis-a-vis, or Trade Commission and Trade Commissioner, for example, Commissioner Malmström has taken toward the protests that were happening outside of the door, saying that global trade is no-brainer and we don't need to justify this anymore. And
She just ignored it, basically.
So, and this is very problematic. It's first of all not recognizing your interlocutor, but secondly, maybe this interlocutor has something to say. And I've been at several meetings where some representatives of the European Commission have been rather dismissive about this challenge, calling it, anti-globalization crazy anarchists, instead of,
I think we all remember the violent demonstrations in Seattle.
So this is the beginning. So I think that taking each other seriously would be really good, and also, in my view, very important for with DJ Trade is to really start cooperating much more intensely with other DJs. For example, very recently we have seen that Germany has proposed a new Marshall Plan for Africa, so which links the foreign direct investment with the our problem with immigration, these are not interlinked. We all know that on the one hand climate change, on the other hand economic underdevelopment fuel migration. There is something to be said for also Commission has done certain steps in this regard. And there is much more to be done also by DG Trade by cooperating with other departments to little bit rethink the way, traditional trade policy with just openness has been pursued.
Jim, enhancing the debate?
Yeah.
You said something about that already, that we need to...
Yeah, thanks for that, Anna. Okay, winners and losers, as Frank said earlier. In the United States, when NAFTA passed, and Bill Clinton went back in later and wanted to have new trade authority to negotiate some new agreements, he said, we have to have trade adjustment assistance in this country. We have too many workers losing jobs from trade agreements. We need to be able to fund this and be able to have some of the winners pay some of the losers. That's how trade works. The Republicans always opposed any trade assistance adjustments in America. They've always opposed it. They always wanted to have the free trade. I'll take the agreement, but I'm not going to take care of the workers who lose their jobs. That's a giveaway. Now, until you get past that...
And now those workers have taken revenge.
They sure have. And they've taken revenge by electing someone who's completely repugnant to their own party. That's what they got themselves into.
For me, it's one of the great conundrums of this election. But okay.
Maybe we have a better quality discussion about these agreements in Europe than they are in the United States. I hope so. But certainly in European states, as far as I'm concerned, we do have meaningful adjustment policy. The European Union's been doing this internally in its own membership since 1965. And we understand it as a concept. If you think about it, there was a time when Maastricht was a coal mining zone. It was an industrial zone. It wasn't the way it is now as a distribution hub for Middle Europe. Think about the transformations that have happened in this country from the textile industry that used to exist out in the eastern part of the country.
I'll get right back to you.
In other words, you can have a discussion with people in this country about this because they understand how it works. And they've seen governments respond and do it. In the United States, we don't have an effective response. Some states do it state by state, California, New York, a few other states. But the rest of the country is just flying blind.
America first. Frank, and then to Felix.
On these 2 points, compensation, I think in the EU and member states we have a lot of social funds available for that. Even at EU level, there's a globalization fund, which gives out money for those who can show that they lost their job because of globalization. So there is fundamentally different. The problem is acknowledged. I would play the ball back and say where and which trade agreements have the interests been totally ignored. Few recent examples. We have a trade agreement with Korea, which is running since 2011. There was a lot of criticism. Our car industry would suffer from very cheap competition from Korea. Nothing of the great fears has come in.
Who wants to have a Daewoo anyway?
Yeah, anyway, but I can tell you at the European Parliament there was a lot of lobbying groups against the Korea agreement. Nothing of the kind has happened. In CETA, nobody of the activists has been able to show which particular interests of which interest groups have been ignored. So it's a matter of dialogue. I mean, I really insist on that because I hear that often. Yeah, on the substance of the trade agreement, I cannot subscribe to the view that we have totally pushed away and don't care about losers and so on. No, if you can talk, you can say, okay, how serious is the dialogue? And of course there is a serious dialogue between the Commission and civil society. We have a lot of institutionalized things before negotiating rounds, after negotiating rounds. Civil society is informed. We have a council and what have you. I can go into details. I would say it's a little bit too easy to say this. We don't take that easy.
Maybe because that whole process has been so bureaucratized that nobody out there is listening anymore.
But there is really, on the European, when we negotiate trade agreement, you cannot believe how many civil society events we have, even at the WTO and so on. Final point, and that is important to make a statement here. Some people in civil society don't want a dialogue, they just protest. And I insist on that. There are people who will never be convinced, and they don't want to be convinced. They want to protest. And I can tell you that is not just something which is coincidence. There are funding channels and what have you. And I'm going back into politics. When you fear that Europe is going to be weakened in the electoral system, you also see similar tendencies that there are attacks on the European Common Commercial Policy by funding from foreign governments because they want to weaken Europe.
I have a sort of intimation of who you're talking about.
Yes, and it is another fact which.
So what are you actually saying, Frank?
I'm saying that when one talks about protests against EU trade policy, one should be able to distinguish. There are good-minded, maybe intellectual scholars who say, well, on this one, on the environmental bit, I want to exactly know what the precautionary principle is. Fine, we can discuss that. Maybe there is an issue and it has to be balanced rightly. Okay, and then you have another kind of civil society which are outright protesters. I hate free trade, I think it's bad, and I tell you, a couple of those are not interested in any kind of solution. They're only interested in weakening.
Yes,
the
but you
European
said they
Union.
were funded by foreign powers.
Yes, exactly.
Who? Rugnummers.
I can, on that one, remain a diplomat, please.
Isn't this a little bit kind of, almost like sliding back into Trump's rhetoric? So there is protesters out there. They must be funded by foreign.
I didn't say they must. No, I'm sorry. I'm pleased.
They are.
No. I mean, sorry. That is exactly not what I said. And I think it's a serious issue which we should take account of.
But can I just come in at that from a slightly different way, if I may? You don't even have to say, "Oh, I'm anti-trade" or "I'm pro-trade." What you can say, and you can shortcut that and just say it, just do it the easy way. You can say,
what is the easy way?
Trade agreements are not legitimate unless they're voted on by every single parliament in Europe, including all regional parliaments. All right, you've just had your last trade agreement. I mean it. You're never going to have another trade agreement. It's over.
Now I'm going to say this.
That's how you end it. That's how you end it, is you play the legitimacy card.
Correctly, partly on legitimacy card.
Could you please stand up?
Okay. Partly on legitimacy card because they lack legitimacy. If you ask any anarchist, are you in favor of free trade? They will say, yes, please. The difference is, it's not free trade. It's pretty much crony capitalism, or as called the neoliberal agenda. The problem is primarily on labor rights on that matter. If you work, you want to have a part of the pie. If you work together, you get a bigger pie. How it tastes, how it smells, how big it is. You can have quite a awkward conversation about those. The difference is if you're going to have labor properly sorted through, you need to have an ability to get yourself through the top. However, if you have a normal person making way less wages here in Europe, we are having wages which are, at least in the Netherlands, around 1 to 50, which is decent. If you're talking about Haiti, for example, the minimum wages are 17 cents an hour. What that means is that if I'm going to work full time, I earn already less than the study subsidy is going to grant me at 18 years of age. So of course I'm going to study because, well, working pays less than studying. On that matter, if you're looking towards the free trade in America, it's not the main problem that there's free trade. Everybody likes to have goodies, everyone likes to meet their neighbors, everyone likes to have products.
What's the question?
Yeah.
On my part, primarily the question is, how can... you just asked me if I could get something sorted, so I pretty much got the microphone in my hand earlier, and I was like, I need to get something sorted because everyone was on the mobile cell phones just getting through Facebook.
Well,
I don't really get a question, sorry.
I got your initial point, and I guess I look at it this way. We're going to have EU parliamentary elections pretty soon, and I'm going to vote. All right? And I'm going to vote for the kind of person that I want to represent me in regard to whether or not I want to approve trade agreements or not. We all vote for that parliament, and that is the mechanism that we've chosen in the European Union to approve or disapprove of these trade agreements. It is a form of legitimacy to send an agreement to the European Parliament that is elected by the citizens of Europe. I don't have a problem with this. And as for the anti-trade, why is it that if I'm working for Siemens, that they're a good deal for me, but if I'm Siemens and I'm negotiating an international trade agreement because I want to get some sense to American auto standards or to American electrical standards, how come I'm evil?
No, you
Why am I okay as long as I'm the biggest employer in town? But the moment I try to represent my interests abroad in international agreements, then I become an evil corporate power. You know, you just got to get over the two-faced characterization of these discussions. And there's just too much of that's sliding in and out. We saw quite a bit of it in Brexit. But there's another one. If we don't get serious about how to do a trade agreement in Europe, any agreement that the Brits get in Brexit, any agreement that they try to negotiate with us in Brexit, they'll never get it through the European Union because it'll be blocked up in every single parliament forever.
It'll work with CETA, at least I hope so.
Maria, I saw inspiration
Yeah.
hit, and then we'll go to Ruth.
I think so. With regard to legitimacy of trade agreements, so first of all, we have to understand what kind of these agreements are. So TTIP is a really huge deal. It's an agreement which basically regulates the entire market.
It does not even exist.
Yeah. So yes, but it was intended to. CETA is also an equally huge agreement. TTIP had even more ambitious institutions. So these are not peanuts. First thing. Second thing. You may pass, so the majority of citizens do not even know what this is, and I acknowledge that. But if you pass those kind of agreements, they actually, many things which are part of the market regulation within the EU, which should be part of public discussions on a regular basis in the European Parliament, depending on the outcomes of the elections, they become kind of legalized, juridified, locked in the form of international treaty. These things are far less flexible to change. So they do immobilize politics, and that is very important. That undermines, all the claims with regard to legitimacy in the parliaments. These things they go very far. So
Jim says this is democratic process, and you say they lock in and immobilize.
They immobilize politics. So there is an element of democracy, of course, if they are approved by the parliaments, but we also have to know what we are approving, and so we cannot rely on purely formal arguments about legitimacy for something this big. There has to be a public debate, there has to be enormous public debate, we have to get people interested in whether this is something that we want.
We as citizens also have a responsibility to be informed.
Exactly.
To inform ourselves.
Many citizens do.
Frank is dying to answer, and then I'll come to Ruth.
Just very quickly. Every international commitment will bind the future legislator. So it's the nature of...
Trump doesn't think so.
Yes, but it's the nature of an international agreement, be it a trade agreement or be it the UN Charter or whatever, to immobilize, or however you want to call it, the next legislator. It's a commitment, which is then abiding for the next one. So that is, for me, really a non-argument. The question is, what is the process in which such a commitment is taken? And there you can say, okay, if it's a very serious commitment, which goes to the heart of the matter, I want that every citizen is properly informed and knows before my government takes a commitment. That is, I think, the thread where we can talk of. But defending TTIP, and you will not be surprised, everything, even the announced commitments of the European Union are on the internet. Everybody can click on it. It is described quite well what is going on. And I can only really, let's say, make the point again, please, if there is a commitment which you find on substance wrong, let's look at the previous trade agreements, let's look at CETA and Korea, and let's identify where on substance something has gone wrong. And I have not been able to find any serious, contention on that regard from a number of interlocutors.
All I can add to this, Frank, is that the morning after Brexit, 4 million Brits went on to Google and Googled, what is the EU, as a matter of fact?
EU?
Ruth?
Yeah.
I want to...
stand up?
Yeah, sorry. I want to complicate it still a little bit further. I guess that behind the theme of this panel is the notion that Trump voters felt they were the losers. But as you already indicated, it's much about perception. One of the wonderful things actually in Ohio, where I was, which was the state that basically brought Trump the presidency, and where the local politician Portman was actually the czar, the trade czar for Bush. and he won
Portman.
overwhelmingly in Ohio. So I wonder if you could reflect on this exactly. You know that the trade czar in Ohio was voted in overwhelmingly. How do you explain this?
Yeah, Rob Portman's popular in Ohio, and do people hold his former position as the USTR against him? I doubt it. I doubt it. He was doing a job for Bush. A trade representative has a job to do.
Yeah.
He was in federal government. He knew his stuff. They vote for him in regard to other qualities that they perceive he has as a senator representing the state. I don't think it's all about trade with Portman. I voted in Wisconsin, which is one of the states that Hillary Clinton didn't visit and was supposed to win by 6 points and lost by 15,000 votes, one of those marginal states. And Hillary did fine in pretty much all the industrial areas. It was the small towns, county, rural, west, smaller areas. It's the farmers, the little villages. That's where he won it. And those people are not dislocated. They are in coal and steel country, like coal and oil country in some Pennsylvania, western Pennsylvania. I get that. But in Iowa, he won by a 10-point margin. Iowa has a great rural economy. It's growing. The whole economy is almost a 0% unemployment rate.
So no deplorables there.
It's just like, whoa.
So I know this because it's exactly.
I'm sorry, you need
Yeah.
a microphone.
Yeah.
So how to explain it then? Because
Exactly. You know.
There's a question over here. Okay.
Yeah. A couple of
So
my
how
friends
do
just-
you explain it?
A couple of my friends said, you know what this is all about? Let's just take a big rock and throw it through a window and see what happens.
Exactly. So
Okay.
so also the unemployment rate in the U.S. was only 4.8. So this whole idea that it's about the storyline about Trump's election is about the losers. The other theory has been that it's about identity politics. It's about sense of belonging, not be. And I think that is much more useful to talk about that than talking about the economic part of it.
He inherited a healthy economy.
May I on that? Because
Maria,
I think
and then we'll go to this gentleman over here.
Because I think there is much truth in that. So I think that what mainly goes wrong is that it's the sense of the future. So if you look at the demographics and take them seriously, then it's not the people who are poor or unemployed necessarily, or it's often middle classes that have voted Trump or voted Brexit. But it's actually the people who could not imagine themselves somehow belonging or having security in their life and being somehow part of the imagined futures of society. So they are not part of knowledge society. And whatever comes then comes as a possible threat to these people. They don't have security. So working women. So that there is a huge backlash against women in America, and it's very much linked to the fact that they may be perceived as threat. Immigration may be perceived as threat to people who are working still, who are not dislocated or poor, but they are threatening because they cannot see themselves somehow as part of the future which we promise to people. So I think what is very important and what is possible path forward, which brings together both global trade people and other people, is really to start thinking about different narratives about economy that could actually kind of present more inclusive futures to those people, so that they do not feel completely, not having any chance, not having any kind of value in whatever futures are presented. Many older people, I just watched a wonderful Italian movie about a guy who was working in public service, and then computers came in, and so those kind of people can turn different ways. So some will, stay whatever they've been, but they can turn to fear. They can be easily mobilized eventually by people like Trump. So it is very much about presenting different kind of future, and that future has to be to large part also economical, care economy, whatever you want. There are many.
I'm going to go to this the question in the audience because we're going to have to round off in a few minutes.
Thank you. My name is Christian Candler. I work at the Embassy of Costa Rica here in The Hague. And my worry is of another nature, let's say. I am very impressed at what has happened this week regarding the NAFTA and how quickly the spaces for dialogue have been closing, and that there are some analysts who are already hinting that the NAFTA may disappear completely. I don't know if that is the case. I am not a specialist in trade, so my question to you as experts would be, what is your reflection, or what do you think? Where is this heading to? And perhaps more interesting also for all of us, what does this informs us about the nature and goals of the American trade policy in the next years, and its impact on international trade regimes? Thank you.
Okay. Could you hand the microphone to the lady in front of you? Yes. And that will be our last question. Yes. Who feels? Frank?
On NAFTA, I could echo what the law professor on climate change said. First is the legal analysis. NAFTA has a clause on termination, and it is unlike in the climate change, not for several years, it's only half a year. In other words, if a government says, I'm going to terminate, then half a year later it can withdraw. That people know, so it can be very quick. In the United States domestic system, termination is a prerogative of the president. So he doesn't even need Congress. So he could unilaterally withdraw with a 6 months notice.
There go our checks and balances.
Yeah, okay. Politically, maybe it's a little bit more difficult. I understand it more that he used it as a threat to say, if you don't budge, I'm going to withdraw. But we don't know what he means with budging. So what is a renegotiating deal which is better for the American industrial worker? That we don't know, we will have to see in the future. But it is something which, if the Mexicans, they have been very clear, if renegotiation does not have anything which is in for us, which only makes our market access worse and we don't get anything, we will never agree. And then it is not totally excluded that indeed NAFTA has seen its days.
Yeah.
Carol Ann, our last question.
Carol Ann Menzies Collier. May I suggest to the members of the panel that the issue was not so much cognitive dissonance with respect to the 5% unemployment rate in the U.S. with the fact that rural Iowa doesn't have the problems with trade, but that you're focusing on an issue which is a side effect of the hatred of the many, many Americans for the Democratic candidate, and that it was that hatred that overruled whatever economic benefits or negative things that would come from the Republican candidate. My question to you is that?
Well, the TPP's been around for a while. Obama negotiated it, and they have not been willing to let TPP come into the lame duck, even if Trump had not been elected. So there's been no great support for Obama in respect to the TPP, and he wasn't running for re-election. Hillary Clinton was running for election on this one. Maybe they hate her, and maybe they hate him. Maybe they just hate everybody. That sometimes also occurs to me. They just hate everybody. I want to join you. Your comments. I agree with your comments on NAFTA, and there are things that Mexico and Canada would like to have in a renewed NAFTA. That agreement is old, 1994. It needs to be updated. But it's going to take a party to want to negotiate on the other side to make exchanges. Trade agreements are exchanges. And there are things that the United States might be able to convince Mexico and Canada to go with. Maybe stricter origin rules that just tighten the requirements a bit and raise some of the thresholds so that there's more domestic local content in a Mexican auto gearbox or a television set or whatever it is. There's a lot of technical things that they can play with. And they can screw it up. My feeling is, yeah, Donald Trump maybe uses things as a threat because he's a deal maker. But also sometimes I think, no, that's exactly what he's going to do. Because he doesn't have the screens that we see as common in diplomacy. He's not playing with that type of psychology. He's just going, I want, and grabbing it off the table. So, we see.
This is a final word for Maria?
I think that, we should also, as Europeans, sometimes a little bit more think about appeal of Trump and its similarity to the appeal of Berlusconi, for instance. So I think, yes, there has been a lot of hate for Hillary, but there is also evidently some space for people of this kind. So, and we have had politicians here for quite a longer while. So, like history is very complex things, and many things are contingent that come to play. So,
what for me was really the wonderful thing about this panel was the extent to the amount of passion that international trade agreements can generate. I never knew that. Because it's all about your livelihood and your sense of belonging and your future and your role in the world. And, well, I've learned a lot. I thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our final speaker of the day, someone we've all been looking forward to, is Jaap de Hoop Scheffer.
Cheers.
Former Secretary General of the NATO, which may soon have disappeared from the face of the earth, we don't know, who is now a professional of international relations at the University of Leiden and also a member of the Advisory Council of International Affairs at Leiden. The floor is yours.
I think it's on. I have to start with a disclaimer or an apology to Tracy Metz and Ruud Oldenziel. From time to time, I'm a mammal. You can find me on my racing bike during the weekends, and I can also say that my daughters hate to see me in that attire. That's the qualifier and the apology. Ladies and gentlemen, a broad brush. Thank you so much, Tracy. Thank you very much. Try to keep in shape. A broad brush number of closing remarks, perhaps not a keynote as is in the program, but a broad brush. In times, I think, in international relations, which are the times of big egos. Trump, Vladimir Vladimirovich, Recep Tayyip Erdogan. And we see a lot of hubris in international relations. Now, as you know, hubris comes from ancient Greece, where it was punishable by the gods. But we see a lot in the present international relations environment. And then hubris stands for excessive pride, egotism, extreme self-confidence. What is the risk of egos, and what is the risk of hubris in international affairs, in my opinion? The risk is that in times of crises, reason, ratio, might fall victim to egotism. And that is a danger and a risk in international relations. Exhibit 1, Turkey. From zero problems with their neighbors, Ahmed Davutoglu as foreign minister, to problems with almost everyone and everybody. Ottomanesque foreign policy overstretch. Now in a mariage de raison, Erdogan with his erstwhile nemesis Vladimir Putin. Exhibit number 2, Donald Trump. Transactions rather than principles. The big ego, democratically elected. Let's stop moaning and complaining. Democratically elected. Leading and independent. More unilateral, perhaps even retreating America. Perhaps, I'm saying, we are not sure yet. I do not have an established opinion on that. I say independent, more unilateral, and perhaps even retreating America. But if he, Donald J. Trump, retreats from Pax Americana, which after all has sustained 70 years of relative peace and stability, we might enter a world of Hobbesian great power conflict. And is that a world we are looking for, I ask rhetorically. I'm saying we are not sure yet, and I'm not sure yet, because the signals, of course, and they have been discussed this afternoon, the signals are contradicting. Giving up the one China policy, cozying up to Taiwan, non-negotiable for Beijing. Beijing will go to war for Taiwan if necessary. The South China Sea and Rex Tillerson's remarks about the, I quote, unacceptability, unquote, of China's behavior vis-à-vis disputed islands and islets. What comes in diplomatic language and in IR after the word unacceptable? Language matters, as has been said this afternoon. Military action? That is not retreating. And that's why I'm saying I'm not sure. Safe areas which should have been established in Syria, as Donald Trump said during the campaign, that is not a retreating America. So independent, yes. Unilateral, yes. Retreating remains to be seen. And all this leads me to one of the key questions facing me and facing us, I think, facing us all. And that question is, can the United States at all afford not to be the indispensable nation, in the words of Madeleine Albright? In other words, how strong will the constant factors in United States foreign policy be vis-à-vis the variables? How strong are those constant factors? If I listen to the Senate hearings of Rex Tillerson and Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis, who I remember very well from my NATO days, there are constant factors, or there should, at least in their opinion, be constant factors in United States foreign policy. We have to wait and see. But in my view, and I give you an example, the United States of America cannot afford to create a political vacuum in East Asia by abandoning TPP. In this, I would add to the final panel, trade is of course trade, but trade is highly political. TPP is highly political. What was the ambition of Barack Obama with TPP? That was part of his pivot, not completely successful, to Asia, to gain and to keep political influence. What do we see now? TPP has been abandoned, and we've seen the Philippines and Malaysia setting sail to Beijing. We see Australia yesterday suggesting a TPP including China, without the United States of America. And this happens in a week where Ireland, Canada and Ethiopia are joining the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, set up by the Chinese. So also for Donald J. Trump, that is the geopolitical reality. And I repeat my question, can the United States ever afford to abandon that region politically? And do not forget, ladies and gentlemen, it is an area, South China Sea, where roughly 70% of all the world's commercial shipping passes through sea lanes. Is that an exclusive responsibility we leave to China? Is it, speaking as a European, an exclusive responsibility we Europeans leave to the United States of America, as we have always done? I hope from my intonation you know what is my answer. So, in one way or another, the United States of America, also under a Trump presidency, will have to take, is my opinion, a political military responsibility for this crucial part of the world. So I repeat, unilateral, more independent, but not retreating. As for Europe and NATO, the European Union and NATO, let me start by saying that President Trump's remarks on the European NATO allies not sharing the financial burden are, of course, fully on the mark. You will not expect to hear anything else from a former NATO Secretary General, but this is what I feel strongly about. Fully on the mark. The European NATO allies have shamefully neglected our responsibility in this regard on our side of the Atlantic. We are still cashing the peace dividend. 1989, the fall of the wall. How long is that ago? And I think we should now change course, change direction, and see that we substantially contribute to a better financial balance inside the NATO alliance. I can give you one example. Joachim Bittner, who works for the German newspaper weekly Die Zeit, said, let the Europeans begin by leasing, paying for all the equipment President Obama pre-positioned in Europe shortly before he left the Oval Office. We lease that equipment, we pay for it, because as soon as you, when you want to have your defense budget in order, it will take much more time. But here, Trump is fully on the mark, and he might be, I say again, he might be more serious in this regard than his predecessors have been. On his NATO being obsolete, it was already mentioned, my take is that Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis might find a few hours on a Sunday afternoon to bring his president up to date. NATO is, of course, the essential tool to discourage and deter Vladimir Vladimirovich from further adventures in what he defines as his near abroad, or in other words, his sphere of influence. Here, Donald Trump's narrow interpretation of US interests might lead to a reassessment of America's international engagements in transactional terms. A disturbing thought when you happen to live in Tallinn, Riga, or Vilnius. The Hague is comfortable in that regard, so is Washington. So is Brussels, by the way. Two further remarks on Putin. I must admit, and I have to give him credit for that he plays a weak hand intelligently, given his successful hacking exercises and wrong-footing the United States of America and all of us in Syria. The dark side of his Syrian intervention, of course, for Putin is that also he has now to face the Colin Powell maxim, the so-called pottery barn rule, which reads, when you break it, you own it. Ceterum censeo, to quote Roman Senator Cato Major, that we need more direct communication channels with Russia in both NATO and the European Union. Despite our differences, despite the need for the moment to keep the sanctions intact. Backroom diplomacy is fine with me if that would be the preferred option, but with all the differences we might have with Russia, I think we are not using the communication channels we might have in our dealings with Moscow. Now, what should be done? What can be done, I should say, and what should be done from the European side? What should be our political priorities? Because you can analyze as long as you want, but analysis is not a policy. I will give you just a few, not limitative, by the way, options, policy options, fully realizing after a few years of personal experience that events usually reign supreme over a carefully planned agenda. Events, my dear boy, events, was what the then British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan told a young journalist immediately after the war. What concerns you most, Prime Minister? Events, my dear boy, events. In making these points, I realize that on some points I'm going against the tide, but I say so be it. One, I mentioned this already, stop lamenting and moaning over the Trump presidency. He is sitting in the Oval Office, if we like it or not. Some might like it, some might not like it, but he is in the Oval Office. He is the commander-in-chief. So no further lamenting and moaning. In the words of Ambassador Schuwer, engage. Engage, for heaven's sake, engage. And do not think that by not engaging, you'll win the day. You'll lose the day. Two, let this Trump presidency be the rallying cry to take ourselves and the European Union seriously. Economically, politically, and last but not least, militarily. And I say, and I agree with Jim Mathis in the previous panel, let's also have a discussion on legitimacy. Because I do agree, if the virus of the referendum will further spread through Europe, nothing will be possible anymore. I'm a strong fan of a representative democracy. Every 4 years in this country, I have the opportunity to vote. And if I don't like the guys and girls I voted for 4 years ago, I'll outvote them. And I think that's an important point in the further functioning of Europe. But let's take ourselves and the European Union seriously. And when I say this, I consider this a message, an important message to the European political center and the European political parties in the center. And my call on them would be stop leaving the floor in the European Union to the fringes, to the extremes of the political spectrum. Stop leaving the floor to Frauke Petry, to Marine Le Pen, to Geert Wilders, to Beppe Grillo. Speak up. Speak up. This is against the tide. But if we don't defend the European Union now, we might not have another opportunity. So let this be a rallying cry, this Trump presidency, because we'll have a lot to discuss with the other side of the Atlantic Ocean as well. We need, in this regard, Angela Merkel in the Bundeskanzleramt, also after the elections in Germany in the fall of this year. And we need the Président de la République Française in the Élysée Palace with the gravitas of restarting, or I should perhaps say restoring, the German-French motor, the German-French engine, which in my opinion is a must, a prerequisite for successful European integration and a sound future for the European Union. I add, we need, in my opinion, also the softest possible Brexit we can achieve. That will not only depend on the British, but it will also depend on us. And again, referring to the final panel, we are talking and discussing frequently how difficult it is for the British to arrange their exit from the European Union. I can tell you from experience, and I know former Minister Hans Wijers will agree with me, to come to a position with the 27 on the European continent might even be a bigger ambition than coming to an agreement with the British. But again, what I said about representative democracy and about referenda is very relevant here as well. I cannot imagine an agreement by the heads of states and government with Great Britain stranding for years in 28 plus regional parliaments. Point number 3. Based on President Trump's worrying remarks about torture, let us underline that both the European Union and NATO are communities of values. Let us state that under no condition any EU or NATO member will tolerate rendition and/or will tolerate to create secret detention facilities on its territory. I think we should make that point now. We should make that statement, and if I'm not mistaken, we have Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis on our side, because he reacted, as you might remember, when Trump started this waterboarding discussion. And Jim Mattis, I say again, whom I know fairly well and in whom I have trust, said torture is not only, of course, out of the question, but it doesn't have any result. Trump came back to the torture issue. I think if we are a community of values, we should say this now and make this clear. Point number 4, given the potential, by the way, before I forget, Paul Ryan also said yesterday or today that he was not on the line of President Trump in this regard on waterboarding and torture. My 4th point, given the potential narrowing interpretation of United States interests, let us not be the witnesses to the funeral of responsibility to protect. I realize that after the war of choice in Iraq and the war of necessity in Afghanistan, these were Barack Obama's terms, as you might remember, and the half-hearted intervention in Libya, I realize that the political climate is not conducive for this type of debate. But here again, I think we cannot completely close our eyes in this domain. Responsibility to protect had a big hit after Libya, because it was a half-hearted intervention and we forgot about the responsibility to rebuild and the responsibility to prevent, and then the whole system doesn't work. We do not like intervention anymore. And I'm not making here a plea this afternoon, of course, to intervene in Syria or in Yemen or wherever. But what I'm saying is this: we should not, if we are a member of community of values, we should not bury the responsibility to protect, how difficult as it is. Point number 5, let's not do away with our rules-based institutions, multilateral institutions, despite their malfunctioning. Are we serious when we think or claim that we can fight terrorism, that we can fight the pandemic, that we can fight the misuse of cyberspace, that we can fight climate change, that we can fight mass migration? The biggest challenge, in my opinion, certainly for the European continent in the years to come. Are we really having the illusion that we can fight these challenges without a system where the right of the strongest not always prevails, and where the less influential can have their voices heard and have their say? Here again, I realize I'm going against the tide. But as I'm defending the European Union, I'll defend those multilateral institutions we have set up. I realize they have, for many nations on this globe now, a Western flavor, too much of a Western flavor. And they were set up by us, they were set up, Security Council of the United Nations, by the nations who won the Second World War. And I can't explain in New Delhi that India is not a permanent member of the Security Council. Malfunctioning, but giving them up is another matter. Not paying serious attention is another matter. And the Chinese understand this. I mentioned the AIIB. They will have their own international institutions where they make the rules. Do we want that? Do we want a nation, influential politically, economically, as it may be? Do we want to have our rules set by a nation where last week the Supreme Judge, the President of the Supreme Court, said we do not have an independent justice system? I am of course also answerable to the party. Do we want that nation? And I take China extremely seriously. Do we want that nation setting the international rules? And if you don't have them at all, you're in the Hobbesian environment I spoke about earlier. Finally, it is my strong belief, and I also say this based on my own experience, that like in your and my personal life, personal relations do matter a lot in international relations and in international politics. It is therefore of importance that we take the man and women shaking Trumpian politics seriously. I say again, engage with them. We might need them now, better said, we need them now, but we certainly need them in time of crises. Diplomacy is, after all, not only saying, I detest your views, end of conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, black swans are to be expected. They will also influence the Trump agenda in the Oval Office. They will influence the agenda of the European Union. They will influence the agenda of international trade, the agenda of climate change. But let us agree, at least, that the black swans will certainly not ruin the atmosphere during the drinks will now be offered. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for these heartening observations. Our final word is from the director of the Asser Institute, Janne Nijman.
Thank you so much, Tracy. I'm very well aware I'm between you and the drinks, and I think we need the heartening drinks. Thank you so much for your closing remarks. Professor Jaap Scheffer will not repeat closing remarks, of course, but allow me to say a few words of thanks to the speakers, of course, to all of you for engaging with this complicating topic, speculation, and still bringing your expertise to the debates. Thank you so much. Thank you to the audience for your engagement, the questions. I think there is obviously a need for a place to discuss these kind of questions, and we hope to see you on other occasions when I'm sure questions of international law and international institutions will come back, also related to these new times. A special word of thanks to Tracy Metz. It was wonderful to team up with the John Adams Institute. When we were thinking about an event on the international legal order and American foreign politics, of course we thought of you and we thought of the John Adams Institute. And it was wonderful to collaborate, and I hope we'll continue to do so in the future. So thank you so much. For the excellent moderation I wanted to add also during the day. Allow me to thank our staff, two people in particular. When I arrived at the office the day after the elections, Dr. Antoine Duval, he's in the back of the room, was in his office and he was devastated, if you allow me to say so. But he turned that all into good. And he took the lead in this event, and you have, as speakers, been communicating with him. So thank you to Antoine, and thank you to Eva da Costa, who has been doing a lot of, she's running, good timing, Eva. I was saying thank you to Eva da Costa for all the organizational matters and having it all organized so well. So if you allow me a big hand for those two, and then please...